got it.
Got it? Okay. So Debbie, do you want to do roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Ryrie?
Here.
President Brennan? Commissioner Chang Karali?
Present.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Here.
Commissioner Mateusz?
Here.
Thank you. Okay, well, I have a slip from Bob. So the public comment section is for things that are not on the agenda. So if it's not on the agenda, you're welcome to.
Understand.
Okay, got it?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Yep.
Okay, Vice Chair, members of the Harbor District. My name is Bob Nisbet. I'm a new resident of El Granada. We just moved here February 1st. My wife and I and our dog, and we just live up the street, and we're loving it so far. Great place to live. I'm also the city manager for Half Moon Bay. So I'm here tonight just to make an announcement. Well, introduce myself. To make an announcement, the city is, and you've probably heard of this, but maybe not, the city is having a Community Preparedness Day, we're calling it. And it's not just a city event, it's a coast-side event. And I have flyers, which I'll pass out. And the event is May 4th from noon to 4. And the idea behind this event, well, I've only been here 6 months. But in the 6 months that I've been here, I've been meeting a lot of people and learning about the coast and learning about the city, of course. And certainly, in all the people I've talked to and some of the events that I've seen, it does seem to me that emergency preparedness is a priority for coastsiders and for the city and for the city council and other agencies and community members. I see people talk about it, I hear it from my council, I see conversations on Nextdoor. There's been a series of events recently that have closed roads, and people realize that we're isolated here, there's not a lot of ins and outs, and there's obviously a lot of concern based on what we've seen in the last year or two with big fires in other parts of California. So it really seemed to be bubbling as an issue as I took the reins as the new city manager, and so this idea came up that we should have an emergency preparedness day and get community folks together, have tables of various partners, nonprofits, other government agencies who are involved one way or another in preparing for emergencies, have some role in the response. So it seems like we've drummed up a lot of excitement. We're going to close 2 blocks right by Main Street on Kelly Avenue on Saturday. I think every table is full. I think my staff or county staff, we're doing it in partnership with County OES, have probably reached out to the district and offered Harbor District to have a table there. I hope they have. If they haven't, I'm making that offer tonight. But for sure come and just trying to get the word out. Should be a lot of fun. There'll be some equipment there for kids. You know, kids like red fire engines and other cool equipment. And just a lot of educational information and a way for the community to talk about these kind of things. So we're pretty excited about it. Also, at 5 o'clock that night, kind of coincidentally, but it worked out really nice, is the first concert of the series that the city hosts in MacDutra Plaza. It's a mariachi band, so you can come to the Emergency Preparedness Day and then get something to eat and then catch some music. So it should be really fun. And there's like 20 of these. I'll give them to the board and let the rest be for other people that are here. So
Great,
thanks
thank
a lot, and if you have any questions of me, I'll take those. And given that I live here and I'm the city manager, if you ever want me to come by and talk about what's going on at the city, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, great, thank you. Eric Nelson?
Hello, my name is Eric Nelson, local resident and concerned citizen. I just was going to inquire. I understand that you can't respond, but I'm here about the bathrooms or the non-existence of bathrooms at the RV park or at Surfers Beach. There's no bathroom facilities, so I just want to kind of bring that to attention, and then maybe have more people. We'll just have our eyes peeled to hopefully get more people involved in making that a reality. Many moons ago, there were bathrooms down there, and they're not, and we're coming up on summer pretty soon. So that was it.
Great, thank you. I don't have any more speaker slips from the public, so I'm assuming no one else wants to give us a view. So we'll move on to commissioner comments. Any comments from our fellow commissioners? No?
But I do want to say I'm excited about the emergency preparedness
Yeah?
thing on the coast, so thanks for doing that.
Mhm. Thanks for being here. Nancy?
Nothing to, tonight.
Okay, well, I've got a few things. So I've made it a habit to let you know what I've been up to with respect to things that relate to the harbor. April 2nd, I went to a Living Shorelines and Resiliency Workshop for Northern Central California, hosted by the Gulf of the Farallones National Marine Sanctuary. The purpose of it was to share information on design of living shorelines for outer coasts, best practices, lessons learned. I went because we're as a district, we have a nice chance to do some creative work on protecting our shorelines and hopefully get rid of things like armoring in places where it doesn't belong. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. Louis White, who's from Environmental Science Associates, who's here and will be talking later. He was also there. He and Max Delaney from Gulf of the Farallones talked about Surfers Beach Project. It was one of the highlighted breakout sessions. So that was on April 2, and then tomorrow there's in March 29, I also went to a sustainability meeting from San Mateo County. It was a meeting on migration, and so it was highlighting with scientists that work with different migrating organisms, birds, whales, mammals, and the discussion was about the impacts of climate change, which a lot of that relates to what we have here in the harbor. We have migratory birds that come through here, we have marine mammals that come through here. So the focus was on activities that impact migratory birds. And then tomorrow there's the 5th Ocean Climate Summit hosted by the Gulf of the Farallones. I'll be going to that, and I think Bob Mateo will be there talking about shoreline resiliency projects. I'm looking forward to that, and you'll hear about what Bob's doing here at the harbor later tonight. And that's it. Does anyone want to pull any items from the consent?
Yes, I'd like to pull item 7.
Item 7. Okay.
Motion to approve items 1 through 6 and 8 through 10.
Wait a second, I want to pull an item too.
Okay.
I'm going to pull item 10. So we got 7 and 10.
Yes.
Okay. Tom, do you want to make your motion?
Motion to approve 1 through 6 and 8 and 9.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Chancarelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Ryring?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Mathush?
Aye.
Okay, so I'd like to reorganize the agenda just a tad. So I'd like to move item 12. And, well, actually, let's do it this way. Let's move item 14 in front, or after item 11, and then item 15 following item 14. That way those three topics, which are related to each other, will happen together.
In
And
the
then-
presentations, right?
What's that?
They're all presentations.
Think
too,
so, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And then I'd like to put the consent item number 10 following those, because there's some aspects in there that kind of relate to what you guys are going to be talking about. So just put it all together.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, it's gonna
Mhm.
be 11, 14, 15, and 10, correct? Before
11,
we get
14,
to
15, and the consent 10. Yep.
Yeah, and then we'll get to 12, and 13, after 10, and then we'll do the consent item for number 7, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm just trying to reorder it on my agenda.
Mm-hmm. We're good? Okay, so West Trail. Do we have a presentation on that?
I have some comments initially. I did the staff report. Is that
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So good evening, Commissioners. For item number 11, we have an update on the West Trail Erosion Protection Project and a proposal for your consideration. To provide some background on this item, in 2012, GHD was contracted to develop a draft conditions survey report which identified eroded areas along the West Trail. In 2014, GHD was again contracted to provide environmental services, prepare construction documents, and provide bidding and construction support services for the West Trail project. While certain elements of this project were completed, the entire project was not finalized as the board, in response to actions taken by the Coastal Commission, had to ask GHD to work on an emergency repair of the drainage culvert outlet. The culvert, or the corrugated pipe under the West Trail, was eroded to the point where the trail was considered unsafe for public use. In July 2013, the Coastal Commission provided the district with an emergency coastal development permit for the emergency repairs. This was a temporary fix with the understanding that the district would come up with a long-term solution to protect the entire shoreline of the West Trail. Pictures on page 2 and 3 of the staff report show the existing damage to the West Trail and the culvert repairs that were needed. The repairs were done in February of 2016, and the West Trail was reopened. In April of 2016, the board approved another contract with GHD for an amount not to exceed $184,086 for Phase 1 of the Pill Point Harbor West Trail Erosion Protection Project to identify shoreline protection alternatives. After several public meetings and board discussion, the sculpted concrete soil nailed wall alternative was decided upon, with later beach replenishment. In September of 2017, the board authorized the general manager to execute a work directive with GHD for Phase 2, not to exceed $249,722, which would include final design, engineering, permitting, bid documents, and construction support services. The upper concrete swale was also to be addressed. This upper concrete swale channels the rainwater to the mouth of the downpipe and had suffered damage in several locations. The original emergency CDP did not allow work to be done north of the bottom draining elbow. The Phase 2 design was to include relining this concrete swale and further repair of the downpipe top funnel, thus returning full function. Phase 2, which is in progress now, will also address the hillside adjacent to the trail with the planting and stabilization of sustainable native vegetation. There's a picture of the swale on page 5 of the staff report for your reference. Finally, pursuant to direction from the California Coastal Commission, GHD is further reviewing the possible alternatives to prevent any additional trail erosion, with an emphasis on living shoreline and minimal hard armoring. Staff's recommendation is that the board, after reviewing the update, or after receiving the update from our consultants, consider approving their proposal to continue design engineering and permitting work, with an emphasis on the living shoreline alternative. As to the fiscal impact of this, the current Phase 2 agreement with GHD has approximately $22,000 left. The proposal under consideration would increase design engineering and permitting costs by an additional $618,000, as their proposal is for a total of $639,930. In the current year's budget, there's a $1.2 million appropriated for the West Trail repairs. However, since some of this work may not be completed until next fiscal year, which is after July 1st, we'll need to ensure that the appropriations are carried forward to next fiscal year as needed for this project. The Director of Administrative Services is looking for mechanisms for carrying forward such funds for ongoing capital projects. since based on the recent discussions at the Finance Committee meeting, they will no longer be appropriated during the budget process.
You mean the 639,000?
Now, any funds for next year's budget
Right.
will be only appropriated when they come to the board for approval. They will
Right.
not be appropriated at the time the budget is approved, just for capital projects. That's the
Okay.
difference now.
Got it.
Now I would like to introduce our West Trail Shoreline team of consultants, Brian Leslie and Craig Lewis from GHD, and Bob Batalio and Louis White from ESA, to provide more details and their presentation and answer any questions.
Great.
And this is Brian Leslie.
Yeah,
Trying to get the name straight.
thank you, Anita.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you for that background.
Sure.
That was, so I'm Brian Leslie, Senior Coastal Scientist at GHD. And yeah, you already introduced my team, ESA and Craig Lewis. So this was a history slide, but no need for that because we got even more than this from Anita. But just highlighting in July 2018 the redirection towards the scope of work. And we've been working since that time to evaluate the feasibility with ESA and us to kind of look at this project differently and whether we can use nature-based or living design elements to stabilize this trail. Our scope of work is simplified and summarized here. And essentially we're going to look at the feasibility of the living shoreline project. That's what we did. Minimizing hard features, notably the soil nail wall, and kind of looking at that design and saying where we might need still hard features, if any. We came up with a living shoreline alternative that we were putting forward to the commissioners tonight. And coordination with agency stakeholders, grant funders, and agencies is also in our scope of work, and we're just moving on to that task now. This graphic at the bottom is showing kind of the spectrum of living shorelines. And really the living shoreline that you select for a coastline depends on wave energy approaching it. So that depends on how much hardened features you need is kind of a function of wave energy. So this is one of the first things we looked at is how much wave energy are we experiencing and what kind of living shoreline we think is most appropriate. Here's our team and some mug shots of GHD and ESA team, and also in our proposal we have other members that aren't highlighted here, like Brad Damitz, and also Dr. Peter Bay, who is a dune specialist. First thing we wanted to understand better is our site. Why are we experiencing this condition? Why are we eroding? And to go more into that, I'm going to hand it off to Bob Batalio to speak to coastal geomorphology.
Thanks, Brian. So my name is Bob Batalio. I'm with ESA. I'm an engineer. I know most of you, I believe. So what this graphic shows is a conceptual drawing of wave patterns. And where's the pointer?
It's the green one.
Oh, right there in front of me. Okay. So what these white lines are intended to show are wave crests, waves propagating in. So we all know Mavericks is out here, and Sail Rock and Mushroom Rock and all that is here. So this line, this would be one wave crest, this would be another, and then the waves as they approach change direction. As they approach to get to the harbor, our conceptual framework is that some waves, especially at high tide, propagate through the breakwater, and then some propagate through the entrance. And then as they propagate, and they're much smaller after they go through the breakwater or through the entrance, but there are still waves there. And then as the waves propagate in, they rush and roll along the shore here. And so the point of that is we think that the sand, a lot of the sand is coming around Pillar Point and across the lagoon, over and through the breakwater, and then being driven northward. That's what these black arrows indicate. We're not showing the local wind waves or any of that. So that's kind of our geomorphic setting, trying to understand why there's sand in certain places and why there isn't sand in others. And if we place sand here, where is it going to go? So the next slide zooms in a little bit. Our project reach is up here. I should have mentioned that earlier, but I think you all know where it is. And what I want to show here is that we do have a nice sandy beach along the West Trail south of this headland. And our conceptual model is that the waves, they bend as they, or refract as they get into shallow water. They approach at an angle. This black line is parallel to the shore, and you can see there's an angle between the wave and the black line, so that implies that the sand is being pushed northward. But when we get up to this headland, the shore contour and the wave crests are parallel, which implies that there isn't much sand moving along shore there. And so that's why there's this nice wide beach. The sand is deposited. When we look at our site, again, what we see is that there is this angle, and there's really no sand there, partly because it's probably blocked here and shunted off, and I think there's some other things going on that we're still getting our heads around, or our handle on. And so that's kind of the same. We'll get back to this later as to what our concept is for this location and how it fits this kind of geomorphic setting, and why we think a natural infrastructure with the sand and gravel and cobble is a viable alternative here, and why we think it'll work. So do you want me to hit the seal rise, or?
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Bob. So, of course, the geomorphic setting is one thing we looked at. Another thing we're considering in our design is sea level rise, and what kind of rates of projected sea level rise we want to include in our design. There's two different ways we can go. We can either use a lower risk inversion projection, which are lower numbers in our design. Since it's a trail, that might be appropriate. It's basically a higher probability of occurrence. So we can use a lower rate of sea level rise and adapt later, or we can use a higher rate of sea level rise into our design and then not have to adapt. So those are kind of the two kind of decision points we have. As I said, we have a concept developed, but there's some tuning that we still need to do, and that's based on conversations with everybody. Other things we're thinking through in our design is consideration of an 18-foot wide trail to maintain emergency vehicle access and, of course, pedestrians. We have an asbestos pipeline within our project area, and we know it's there, and there's ways to accommodate that in our design, bury and protect it. Where we can source cobble, gravel naturally, or kind of within the local region that's not too out of place. So importing this material that's kind of native looking, and also where we can find sand. We understand there's some sand sources available that we're excited about. And then also the stormwater infrastructure that's in place, and whether we know we need to repair pieces like the concrete swale, which was included in our old design of the soil nail wall, but we're also looking at the CMP pipe and wondering whether there's ways to kind of rethink what's there. Maybe can we remove that, and with some sort of energy dissipation, more naturalized looking feature with rock. So we're kind of thinking within our proposal, we have like a feasibility of rethinking that drainage system. So our living shoreline concept can be, I think Bob put it best described as like a bookend, where we have a gravel cobble berm that protects our trail in an eroded state. And in a nourished state, if we have sand sources available within the harbor that we can utilize, we can potentially build out a beach and build out a dune system. So we also have this rock finger element within the eroded case. We think that longshore transport of sand is what's eroding our beach here. So we think that creating somewhat of a groin feature, something that interrupts the longshore transport of sand, would be something we'd want to include, but we're still kind of tuning that based on future work. An example of this kind of bookended case is Surfers Point, which was brought up by Ed, and in Ventura. And you can see on the left, in March 2016, you can see an exposed, I believe, cobble mattress, and Louis and Bob can correct me, but the cobble is exposed in an eroded state. And then November 7, 2017, with milder wave conditions, the beach came back and buried that cobble. And so this is kind of like the two ends that we could see at our site. And to speak to kind of the eroded bookend, the gravel and cobble beach, I'll hand it back to Bob.
Okay.
Kind of a design with nature kind of approach.
Yeah, just going back to this Surfer's Point, I went the wrong way. Surfer's Point, so we designed this, and it was constructed a few years ago, and we're monitoring it now, and you should have seen it before, it was a lot worse. There was a bike trail, and it was all eroded, and so this is pointed to as one of the, I guess, one of the poster projects for why natural infrastructure can be functional. So here, what we show here, this is kind of a first sketch, and these look more like coastal engineering structures. But the idea would be to put in rock fingers, and we'll show a picture in a minute that shows some of the existing rock outcrops along this section. And the idea, we were hoping to find some used rock that's on site already and some natural looking rock and create something that looks like it was there naturally, as much as possible. And so these would look a little more linear and not as fat at the end. But the idea is that by putting these structures in, we mimic what we see farther south with that big headland. So we're creating a location here where if the waves start moving the gravel, cobble, and sand, it will be blocked partially. These will be small structures that can be overtopped, would be blocked, and then the sediment will deposit and the shore will rotate out more into the waves, and then the longshore transport would be reduced. Without that, our concern is, and this is one of the things we're going to look into, the sediment could move more quickly than we would like, and up to the beach, and then this protective deposit would reduce in width, and that's why we want to put these structures in. So, sorry that was kind of a long-winded explanation, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them if I can. And then, so this is kind of our inspiration. So what we see here is that you can see there are rock outcrops underneath. This is the trail. So, we forgot to mention that, during high winds and high tides, waves erode this, and but also now if we're going to place sediment, we want to have a stable planform that's something that fits and will last and not have a lot of maintenance. And so when you look at this, so you see that under this fill and earth that's easily erodible, we have this these kind of rockier substrate, and then there are these fingers that stick out, small versions of this point, and then you can see some gravel and cobble that has accumulated here. So our intent would be to use similar materials, build this out, and then ideally bury it in the sand.
Can I ask you something about the
Yes,
previous
please.
slide?
Sure.
So the number 1 and 2 fingers, can you kind of point out where those are gonna go? I mean, is this just along, is that side just along the West Trail, or is that, maybe right there?
So it would be, this is kind of hard to see, but there would be one right here. There's actually an existing rock finger, and what we want to do is emphasize that a little bit more. And then the other one would go close to this junction with the beach, and depending on if we have the outfall or not, we're looking at maybe we don't need the outfall there, maybe we can reroute the drainage. But if the outfall pipe, the storm drain outfall is still there, we probably will locate the second one just south of it so that it's not in the area of deposition, and it's more in the area that it will be free to flow.
So they're pretty
That
close
makes sense.
together. This is a very enlarged view of
Yeah,
that
and
small area.
the idea is as low a profile as we can make them,
Yeah.
with native looking rocks if we can, and that's one of the challenges. We're gonna have to look for some rocks, and we don't wanna cause a problem somewhere else.
Mhm.
But ideally, they would match what's already out there and, or close, and that's why we have this picture, because this is at a medium tide, but at a lower tide, you can see there's a lot of rocks that are scattered about here. There's a couple, like this is a piece of concrete from something, but a lot of the rocks are native rock. They're just pieces of this that have been broken off, and So there's a rock finger, let's see, right, actually this one, it's a little hard to see, but here and here, one of these two is where we would try to emphasize this more and extend it, and you probably wouldn't see much of that rock finger at this time. But the idea is that the gravel would have a place to deposit like it is in this little spot. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And then we have a rendering, which, you wanna, so anyway, this is what, ideally this would look like is, we would have the rock fingers here, put in the gravel cobble and then cover it with sand. And we may extend the rock fingers a bit to hold the sand. This is one of the, kind of the parameters that we need to sort out. Ideally, we would get something like this, which looks like the trail to the south. Now, we recognize that this is really cool, and you know, the Coastal Commission staff should hopefully really embrace it, but we do have to recognize that this is a bigger footprint of fill than, you know, a small, so there's, to some extent, we'll have to see what people say. And so, but we're pretty confident this is the way to go within a range, and we think it'll work great. I'm actually really excited about it.
Yeah. Same, thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
And as Bob mentioned, the beach to the south was kind of our design inspiration for this site. Nice kind of shot as you kind of get on the far south side. That's kind of the scale that we're looking at too, as far as width, which is about a 50 to 70 foot dry beach, including the dune. And we estimate needing about 5 to 10,000 cubic yards to develop something like this of sand.
I'm sorry, 5 to 10,000 cubic?
Cubic yards
Okay.
of sand. And as Bob mentioned, this is kind of going to be a discussion with the agencies about the width and obviously input from the community and stakeholders of what kind of elements are most important, habitat versus recreation. We want to balance everything, but it's going to be a kind of a moving target.
And so which agencies are you referring to?
Coastal Commission, Army Corps, Regional Board, so it's going to be a fill within waters of the U.S. that we're going to hopefully bring habitat in, so sometimes they consider that like a net zero
Yeah,
or
okay.
self-mitigating. So that's where we hope to land, and Brad, maybe you can speak to that at some level.
Sure, yeah, I can address it real quickly. One of the issues with these living shorelines is they're actually very popular and used all the time on the East Coast. Places like Florida, you know, they have an existing permitting system set up to make it streamlined and easy. Here, they don't so much. It's a new thing. So the Coastal Commission kind of approaches it real cautiously. One of the differences, to just go back to the difference between the East Coast and here, is the alternative on the East Coast is big seawalls and roof edgements and things like that, which are much more common. So they're kind of incentivizing this new method. Whereas here, we don't have those options of building seawalls and stuff anymore. So it will be a bit of a challenge, but I think that they will embrace it. They're gonna ask for a lot of information, and there may be some slight modifications to the design, you know, obviously to different iterations to address the permitting concerns.
And just to give people a sense of scale, the amount of sand you're talking here is 5 to 10,000
Yeah.
cubic yards, and the Surfers Beach replenishment project is like 75,000, so it's much bigger.
Yeah.
And
Way
another
bigger.
concept with this is that there are other places in the harbor where we may want to protect the shoreline, and so I look at this as somewhat of a demonstration project that something like this could work, and also maybe learn from it to go on to the next project with a little bit more confidence.
And that would be our permitting approach, exactly just like we're doing with Surfers Beach, demonstration, pilot type of. So,
Yeah.
So are y'all gonna be talking to like CAL FIRE at all, just to make sure that they will have adequate access? Or, well, like Coastside Fire, which I think is CAL FIRE.
So with the 18-foot width, is that?
Well, I don't know, I mean, have y'all talked to them? That's my point.
I haven't that correct?
I don't recall those conversations, yeah, and that's, I think based on our past experience, that would be adequate, but that would be something we would definitely do.
Yeah, I mean,
Confirm
just,
that.
just because over time, I know that's a concern now that if there's wind, erosion, any kind of, they'll know what they'll
Yeah.
need, but I would highly suggest that y'all talk to them just to get an understanding of what they need, because that is a concern, of the public that was brought up a couple years ago when this project was, when I first got on, that was a pretty big concern, just emergency vehicle access.
We would definitely do that, we'd also want to control the type of vehicles they
Yeah.
use to
Yeah.
accommodate that.
And they know what kind of vehicle they probably wouldn't
Yeah.
use on there, right? But the point is that there has to be a conversation so that it's available and accessible to,
Do you have a schedule?
rescue, water rescue or whatever.
That would be later.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thank you.
So, when do you put them in order, this number?
Within our scope of work, we did some numerical modeling to understand whether each would hold. There's more work to be done here, but we did a first look and wanted to share that with you guys. So what we looked at is cross shore, basically waves approaching the site straight on and waves approaching the site obliquely. So on the cross shore side of things, we looked at a model called cross shore or seashore. And we looked at a total of 24 simulations. We looked at what we consider an operational wave case, which is kind of like an ambient. It's a 1-year data set we got from the Army Corps of Engineers. And we also looked at extreme waves from that same study, kind of based on that same study from swell, like long period wave events, and also short period wave events, kind of wind waves. And what we found during the operational wave case is we didn't, like the ambient conditions, we didn't see a lot of movement of our beach fill. So that's our trail, the kind of exaggerated, it's a vertical kind of exaggerations going on here, but there's the dune and there's the beach fill. You kind of see the erosion happening kind of at the toe of the fill, and not a lot during the operational case. Compare that to the more extreme wave case, and we start to see a little, and also elevated water levels from surge and sea level rise, and we start to see kind of more erosion within our profile, especially with sea level rise. The most eroded case that you see, that light blue line, is about 3.5 feet of sea level rise. So, and again, this is just to understand when we think how this beach would perform, and when we think we need to re-nourish, or the maintenance schedule. And then to kind of speak to the long-term, or the longshore, longshore waves, and you kind of see a little picture of a wave approaching the site obliquely. We looked at a lit drift model. We looked at 6 cases, focused on one sediment size. The other model, we looked at different sediment sizes, kind of bracketing what we thought we'd see out there, about 0.1 millimeters to 0.2 millimeters D50. This one we focus on kind of a medium sand, and again look at the swell, long wave, or long periods and short period waves, and look at different wave angles, and just trying to understand what that would mean to our beach fill. And what we found is these short period waves approaching at an angle really did result in some erosion, which we expected. As wave angle increased, we saw more erosion, as we expect. We really need to do a little more work to understand the frequency of occurrence of these waves of angle, of obliquity. Is that a word? And in the ESA proposal, we talk about deploying a wave gauge to do just that, try to understand the frequency of occurrence and,
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And what angle they approach our site at during different conditions. And we also need to look at this cobble gravel beach with this. We didn't model the effects of cobble gravel within our models. We expect far less erosion, but we need to do that check. So next steps, we want to move this concept into final design, just permitting CEQA, and again, we're bringing this team together to do the work. We also think, as was mentioned here, the monitoring of this project makes sense as a demonstration so that other communities can learn from it, seeing that with other living shorelines within the state. And maybe adaptation, if we decide to go with a lower sea level rise rate, we can kind of adapt over time. And
Oh, I
especially
see.
as,
Mhm.
as using this site as a site for sand sources as they become available, we can adapt and tweak things as we move along. Thank you. And we'll open it up for
So I have a
questions.
question.
Yeah.
So if you look at all the reports that are coming out on just the way climate is changing, one aspect is more intense weather systems coming through. And we've seen a little bit of that recently. Do you guys have any sense of, so the reason I'm asking that is with respect to sand coming into the harbor, because we have a net amount of sand that's been accumulating over time, and like Bob said earlier, a lot of that sand just comes through the breakwater, and you can see it on the south side and on the northwest side of the harbor. And so with more intense weather systems, I would expect, and since I'm not an engineer, I'm asking the question, do we expect more sand to be coming in or less? Any ideas?
Yes. So the projections for waves in our area, that the last I've read, is that it's kind of uncertain. And we may actually have a reduction in some of our North Pacific swells, but an increase in our southern swells from the South Pacific. Has to do with the change in the ice in the Arctic versus the Antarctic, and landmass in the Antarctic. But anyway, as far as sand delivery, I would say it's kind of hard to say. I haven't seen anything definitive on that. I would expect it to continue, partly because I think some of the erosion we get from the bluffs in Moss Beach is from terrestrial processes, rainfall, and the rainfall is intensity is supposed to increase.
Yeah.
So, but I don't have a firm opinion on the waves, actually.
But with Deer Creek, certainly you probably get more material.
Yeah. Right.
I think that I'll add there, I was thinking with sea level rise, the breakwater might be overtopped more frequently.
Oh, yeah.
And that might be a source of additional sand, through and over.
Right.
If we get 3 more feet of sea level rise, that could be.
That'd be significant.
And the port doesn't do anything.
I have a question.
With sea level rise, the bluffs in the region are gonna also experience accelerated rates of erosion, and so all the way from Pillar Point to Moss Beach is another large source of sediment with sea level rise as the whole shore adjusts to those higher water levels. And so, there may be more sediment available that may be coming down the coast, but yeah.
So these are things that we hope we can talk about more in our climate change resiliency committees, and I'm hoping that we can talk about how the Harbor District can work with you guys in an overall sand management program, looking ahead rather than being reactive to these things. So for the public's sake, and just stay tuned. We'll be doing a lot more of this.
I have a question on page 11.5, which is page 5 of 6 of, well, actually just go to 11.5. It says, pursuant to the direction from the California Coastal Commission, our consultant is reevaluating. So can you just walk me through what that process was with the California Coastal Commission? I didn't realize that. What happened, I'm just so that I'm prepared, so if someone asks me, I know what to say.
Yeah, sure. So we received a letter, it was a comment letter on our soil nail wall design, and the permitting process is part of that.
Yes.
That was, I'll say, kind of geared towards, why not a living shoreline, kind of prove it type of questions. And that's kind of like a high level. So just like, can you look at this and can you look at that? So that was at a high level what I'll say the questions were geared toward. Anything to add there?
I agree.
Yeah.
So they asked, why not a living shoreline? Okay, so how did this get brought to their attention?
Well, the permitting process, of course.
Right.
So we're working towards a permit.
But I didn't realize they would be so delve into such detail. I mean, I'm not unhappy, I'm just curious.
They released adopted sea level rise guidance policy in 2015. It's part of now requires a coastal hazards and alternatives analysis for the study. And one of the pieces of where they're reviewing permits is that alternatives need to be considered, and one of the main objectives is to look at what alternatives have the least impact on coastal resources. And so that means a suite of alternatives need to be looked at least at a conceptual level for the planning process. And one of the alternatives needs to consider zero impacts to coastal resources. And so they're through that document, they also describe a lot of more natural system type approaches to shore management and alternatives to armoring or hybrid approaches. And they describe a whole adaptation process for looking at how to adapt on the coastline and using hybrid or nature-based types of
Okay,
alternatives.
thanks. Nancy, did you have any questions or anything? Okay, Tom?
I just wanted to thank everyone for the presentation, and I'm very excited about moving forward with this project and the great team that's been assembled. So I feel really positive and excited about it. So looking forward to see the next steps. So I would like to make a motion. I move that we approve the consultant's proposal to continue design, engineering, and permitting work with an emphasis on the living shoreline alternative.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
No.
Okay, roll call?
Commissioner Matthews,
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz,
Aye.
Commissioner Shankarelli,
Aye.
President Brennan,
Aye.
Commissioner Ryan.
Aye.
Great. So let's see, Ed has done a little reassembling of the agenda here. Let me see if I can figure it out. So next we're gonna go to 14, which is Surfers Beach replenishment pilot project update and proposal presentation. And Anita is gonna give us the staff report on that.
Okay. Good evening, Commissioners. In item number 14, we're providing an update to the Surfers Beach replenishment project, as well as a proposal. As far as some background information, the goal of the Surfers Beach replenishment pilot project is to remove sediment that is built up in the Pillar Point Harbor out of breakwater and move it to Surfers Beach so that it can be reused. The picture on page 2 of the staff report shows the proposed Surfers Beach placement area. In addition to addressing erosion and public access issues at Surfers Beach, this project would also address the issues associated with the shoaling that has occurred inside of the harbor since the outer breakwater was constructed. Surfers Beach has suffered from significant beach erosion contributed at least partly to the construction of the Pillar Point Harbor breakwater. The board approved this pilot project at the October 2015 board meeting, and we executed an agreement with the consultant, Mr. Bradley Damitz, for phase 1 of the project, which involved obtaining grant funds. Mr. Damitz was able to successfully apply for a grant through the Ocean Protection Council for the necessary planning, engineering and design, environmental studies, and regulatory compliance and permitting. The grant award was for $75,000. The board approved the acceptance of this grant at the October 2016 board meeting. Project management costs to date have been approximately $49,000, and therefore about $26,000 is still available. Mr. Damitz was also able to successfully obtain a grant from the Division of Boating and Waterways for $800,000 for project construction and monitoring costs. This includes sediment placement on Surfers Beach of up to 75,000 cubic yards of clean sand excavated from inside the outer breakwater at Pillar Point Harbor. It will also fund a physical and ecological monitoring program during and after the construction phase to meet requirements of permitting agencies and to gather additional data that could be used in designing an ongoing opportunistic beach nourishment program. Since the initial contract was issued in 2015, Mr. Damitz has led the project management, coordinating with district staff and contractors to accomplish the following tasks. 1, secure grant funding for the project totaling $875,000, as just mentioned. He collaborated with GFNMS to identify acceptable project parameters, identified all permitting requirements and conducted permitting workshops and site visits, coordinated with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to model a variety of project design scenarios, identified a project design preferred alternative and worked with engineers to develop permitting level design plans, conducted extensive stakeholder outreach, including more than 12 presentations. He developed RFPs for engineering and sediment sampling and analysis services and issued contracts for services. However, additional work still needs to be completed to move the project forward through the planning and implementation phase. A detailed proposal from Mr. Damitz is attached to the staff report as to all the work that is still necessary. And in addition to the prior project management fees, other costs to date for the project include contract to Kinetic Labs Incorporated for $31,000 for sediment sampling and analysis, and a contract to ESA for engineering services for $105,000. Potential additional future project soft costs include complete eelgrass surveys to map beds and pre and post project surveys. I don't know how to pronounce this word, bathymetry? Is that
Bathymetric survey.
right? And beach profile surveys, other required surveys and studies required by permitting agencies. As to fiscal implications, the current year's budget includes $920,000 for the launch ramp dredging / surfers beach replenishment projects at Pillow Point Harbor. This board authorized Ocean Protection Council grant funding of $75,000 for this project in October of 2016. An agreement with Mr. Damitz was executed in October 2015 to assist in design engineering permitting. Due to the additional design engineering permitting challenges, Mr. Damitz requires an additional $56,000 to continue efforts through project completion. Mr. Brad Damitz is here for the presentation to provide more details and answer questions. A copy of his presentation and his proposal are also attached to the staff report. Here's Mr. Brad Damitz.
Thank you, Nan. You made it easy on me for this. And thank you, commissioners. I'm going to make this is going to be a fairly brief and quick presentation for a couple of reasons. One, John asked me to kind of just give an update and let you know where we're at, and Anita did a lot of that already. But secondly, because we're at the point in the project where we're about to have a whole bunch of pieces of information coming together in the next month to 6 weeks or so, where we're going to have the design plans, we're going to have all these pieces in place, and we'd like to do a more detailed presentation to the board at that time. So I'll just give you the quick run through here. Just for the purposes of explaining the project, I've kind of broken it down into 5 different categories of what the planning phase means for this project. So what we're talking about is stakeholder collaboration and public outreach, which is very important for a project like this. Project design and engineering, equally important obviously, because we need to know how to put that sand on the beach, the best way to actually do the work. Environmental review, permitting and agency consultation, and then biological and physical monitoring and design and planning. And then another one, which is just kind of project management, I guess, kind of. So we officially began in July of 2017 with planning, and we'll continue this until the project is complete, which I can get into in a little bit. So real quickly, because Anita did touch on this, we have made a lot of accomplishments to date, including a lot of outreach. Including Commissioner Lorenas even did a poster at one of the sea level rise events. But we've had a lot of presentations to different folks about it, and then a lot of meetings with jurisdictions and agencies to talk about the meeting. But we also have a technical advisory group that is convened to provide, and it's mainly agency folks from the technical side of things to provide input on the project design and engineering. So speaking of design and engineering, at this point we've received a ton of input from all the different agencies and municipalities that are involved, and we've gone through a whole list of different design alternatives. So if you remember in the beginning when I was presenting this project 2 years ago, we were talking about the possibility of having to use dump trucks and excavators and move the sand physically because of sanctuary regulations. Well, we've virtually crossed out all of these alternatives and gotten to the point where we have a preferred project, which I'll present to you in the upcoming meeting. And I can give some of the details of that today. But we've also, so we've looked at the design options and come up with this preferred alternative of where we're going to place the sand and where we're going to get it from. But also issued a contract to ESA for providing the engineering services, not only in the planning and permitting level plans, but all the way through construction support, so we have them on board, and we know that everything's going to be taken care of, even when they're actually moving the sand around. And then finally, another engineering thing that helped us make this decision is the Army Corps of Engineers has worked closely with us to do modeling. We provided them with different scenarios of where we wanted to place the sand, and they ran computer models of these, and that helped us hone the positioning and where we want to put it, which is the lesson we learned from that modeling is the closer to the outer breakwater that you put it, and the more concentrated in that area, the better the effects you'll have as far as protecting the shoreline and keeping that. Whereas if you spread it in a long, narrow line all the way down the beach, or you put it at the other end by Murata Road, you wouldn't get those same projected benefits as you do. So environmental review is a big one for this project. It's a pilot project, and that means that we have to proceed kind of carefully because the agencies like Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary don't have any experience permitting a project like this, so they want to work very closely with us and make sure that everything's acceptable. So we've looked at a lot of the past literature and studies and kind of delved into what the Army Corps of Engineers did over many years and kind of took pieces of that, so that's been helpful. And we've also completed an eelgrass mapping survey. So one of the, I'm not going to call it an obstacle, but one of the unexpected challenges that we've run into is that there is eelgrass. We never have documented eelgrass in the Outer Harbor before. So we just, a couple weeks ago, had that area mapped out so they can locate exactly where that bed is for both this project and what's required for the boat launch ramp project as well, which I'll talk about next. But now we're going to use that eelgrass map. The report should be available in the next few days. I'm expecting it by Friday. We'll know exactly where that is. We'll have a baseline survey, and then Louie and Bob, when they're drawing up the plans, can avoid that area and find other areas. The other piece, and I think that's an upcoming bullet, the other piece that's going to help us refine the design plans. They've already done, like I said, the permitting level plans, but they need to be refined based on additional information coming in. So one important piece of information in addition to the eelgrass is the sediment sampling results, and we expect them to go out and get those within a month or so. I'm thinking either very end of April or early to mid-May. And we have different core locations, so they're going to go in, and we have a whole plan on how to do that, so we can identify where the good sand is and rule out any areas where there's mud or other stuff that wouldn't be beach compatible. Permitting and agency consultation, that's been a huge part of the work so far, just working with the sanctuary and others, trying to kind of step through what might be workable and what might not. And we've done some workshops and site visits and all that kind of thing. Those will continue, in fact, probably ramp up as we move closer to the project. And then another challenge that we're working on is how do you do physical monitoring and biological monitoring to see how the sand, how long it stays on the beach, where does it go, how does the beach profile change over time, but also biological monitoring. Are there any unacceptable impacts, turbidity, things like that, just to more to show, we're not expecting anything like that, but we want to be able to show the agencies that, look, we're not expecting anything and we didn't see anything, but if we do find results, then we can refine it and either say, okay, this is unacceptable, maybe we can't do this again, which I would not expect that at all, or say, well, we need to tweak the designs a little bit to be able to mitigate some of these. But again, that's not anything that is expected, but it's just a big requirement, particularly for the Coastal Commission, is that you have these days, pretty complicated biological monitoring, as well with the West Trail project and others. So Anita touched on this. We applied for and got an $800,000 grant to pay for the project itself, and that was based on estimates and looking around at other projects, similar types of projects. It seems like, and another piece of information, I'm going to just kind of bounce back to something I said. There's a few pieces of information that we're waiting for on the project to be able to make a presentation and be more definitive. We're also waiting on a projected cost estimate, so we can figure out, do we have enough? And then if we don't, then we're gonna need to decide, do we wanna do a scaled down project? Do we wanna pass around a hat to other folks like Caltrans that are stakeholders that may wanna contribute? Or, there's other options, but that's gonna be a question that will come up, that we'll probably, reach out for input. And then, of course, the OPC to help pay for some of the planning, including my work on the project. Anita touched on this, the main cost so far has been engineering, my project management costs, and then Kinetic is gonna be going out and doing the sediment sampling, so they haven't been paid yet. Obviously, the engineers, haven't, that's the whole contract for the whole project. And, John asked me to touch upon what might be some of the costs that we can expect with a project like this. And, of course, my proposed project management costs, but also we're gonna have to do more eelgrass surveys. That first one was just a baseline. The eelgrass surveys are good for 60 days, so we're looking at probably we wanna do the project late spring because it's a good window as far as contractor availability, you get a better price. So these are all things we're gonna weigh once we look at the costs. But, we would want to do more eelgrass surveys, one at the beginning of the eelgrass season, which is April 1st, and then that's good for 60 days. So, and then probably another eelgrass survey post-project. And then there's going to be some additional bathymetry and beach profile surveys that need to happen before the project, and some other biological stuff, but I'm not expecting a huge amount because the Army Corps of Engineers already did a full EA on the project, which we can use for a lot of the analysis, but there's going to be additional, site surveys and that kind of thing. That was the end of the slideshow.
So I have a question. Could you back up to the studies slide? I think that was it.
Yeah.
So at the climate meeting I was in, where Surfers Beach project was highlighted, a question was posed at the breakout session on the studies, and that is, the studies that are going to be done, the physical and biological, are they going to do a transit that goes from the ocean side all the way through the shoreline to the revetments, or is it just going to stop at like mean high tide?
We're going to have to go a little bit offshore. It's going to be sort of a negotiation process to come up with the exact right program. The examples that were provided by the Coastal Commission biologist, who I believe was at that meeting, were for multi-million cubic yard projects with kelp forest, other sensitive rocky reef habitat and stuff. It was a completely different type of project, so I'm hoping that they're not expecting that we do something like that, which would probably take up the whole $800,000 for a grant, right? So we're kind of, it's undefined. There's going to be a workshop coming up. I'm kind of working with Army Corps of Engineers to come up with a proposed approach, and then we're going to bring in the sanctuary and others. So we've already discussed it with them. And in our first workshop, actually, on biological monitoring, we got input from the agencies, and it was going to be a very simple project. And then later, we got input from the biologists from Coastal Commission, and it seems like it's going to be a little bit more complicated. And more on that when I present at the next commission meeting.
All right.
So I'm sorry, I know you guys said this already, but what is the schedule roughly? When do we think?
So I didn't actually say that.
Oh.
What we had been saying is that we were going to shoot for this summer, and what we haven't formally announced, but I'm expecting once we get the cost estimate and other things coming in, that's probably unrealistic, definitely unrealistic, and the input that we received from the technical advisory group is if you can't do it by early to midsummer, wait until the following fall, based on not only the costs of it, but also because you want the material to stay on the beach for the whole summer.
So it might happen in the fall of 2019, is that what you're?
No, it would happen in the spring of 2020.
Oh,
as
spring
early
of
as
2020,
they would allow us
okay,
to do it.
got it, okay.
And believe it or not, it can make a difference of like 20 or 25% of the cost based on when the dredging contractors are busy in the busy season.
Yeah.
Sometimes before the busy season starts, they like to keep their crews busy and you can get a much better deal. So we're kind of looking at all these factors.
Okay. So I know we're gonna hear more detail on the next go round, but just thinking ahead, we're gonna do this in 2020, we're gonna move hopefully as much material as we can.
Yeah.
In the event that we learn after doing it that the material doesn't stick around as long as we'd hoped, of course it's gonna have a beneficial impact as it moves towards Miramar.
Yeah.
So it's definitely gonna be useful somewhere, wherever it goes. Are we kind of thinking ahead to what Plan B might look like if this doesn't work very well? Like, have we looked at things like artificial reefs or things like that that could slow down the impact zone there?
The Army Corps, I believe, looked at a few of those alternatives in their alternatives analysis, and they kind of ruled them out. They said that beach nourishment, 150,000 cubic yards would be the best way to approach it.
They did, okay.
Yeah, but I don't think we would rule out anything like that. I mean, the question is going to be, and would be a question for you guys as well, is if the sand disappears and it doesn't continue to have benefits as much as expected, then is it worth pursuing it, or do we want to focus on inside the harbor where you might get a bigger benefit? This is why this is a pilot study.
Right.
But another thing that we've heard from a lot of people that we're going to incorporate into our outreach plan is that we really have to set expectations, because the sand is going to disappear over time.
Yeah.
Although, even though you don't see it on the beach, it's going to migrate offshore and still cause the waves to break farther offshore, still have benefits for many years, which we should be able to see from some of our monitoring. That might not be a visible, beach.
Right.
So people may think, oh, that only lasted 2 years, that's a waste of time, whereas, it may be continuing. But that's all.
Well, I think even with that, I think there's gonna be a lot of support for this project because the erosion issues that are further south are really significant. And so I think everybody thinks getting more of the material in circulation is a good thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Okay.
In addition, of course, it is clean sand that we are getting out of the outer harbor.
Yeah.
That's obviously a negative there.
Right.
So we're benefiting in two ways.
We're dredging.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to make a motion, or are there more questions?
Well, I'll move to authorize the interim general manager to execute a professional services agreement with consultant Brad Damitz for an amount not to exceed $56,000 to complete the project management for the Surfers Beach replenishment pilot project.
Second?
Okay, not hearing any further discussion, can we have a roll call?
President Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Mathush?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Byron? Aye. Commissioner Tinkerell?
Aye. Thanks, Brad.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you
you
very
very
much.
much. Appreciate it.
Look forward to you coming back.
Thanks. Yeah, and we expect a lot of progress in the next few
Yeah,
months.
it's just like such an ongoing project. You have to be so careful every step of the way, so thanks for being so careful every step of the way.
So
Speaking
next,
of ongoing projects.
I know, right? Item 15, right?
Yeah. So item 15, we have Pillar Point Harbor Launch Ramp Dredge Project Update. Proposal, consideration, presentation, and this is Anita's item.
Okay, now, once again, Commissioners, this item is a related item to the Surfers Beach project. In this item, we're asking for additional funds for project management services in relation to the launch ramp dredge project. As to some background, in May of 2016, the district entered into a professional services agreement with Mr. Brad Damitz for an amount not to exceed $22,500 to coordinate a maintenance dredge episode at the Pillar Point Harbor launch ramp. At the same time, Mr. Damitz was also working with the district to identify funding for the Surfers Beach sand replenishment project. Because the sand accumulation at the launch ramp was not that severe at the time, and Mr. Damitz had been able to procure an Ocean Protection Council grant for soft costs for that project, it was decided that it would be efficient to partner the two projects, as the sand to be removed from the launch ramp area could be used to replenish Surfers Beach. Then the historic storms occurred in February 2017, which caused part of the launch ramps to be totally covered in sand. A picture of the shoaling at the launch ramps is shown on page 2 of the staff report for your reference. The storms qualified us for emergency disaster relief funds from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Cal OES, the State of California's Office of Emergency Services. Therefore, Mr. Damitz and our staff applied for grant funding from FEMA and Cal OES for debris removal and received an award for up to $395,000. Staff has already successfully submitted some invoices to FEMA and Cal OES. The cost for these professional services agreements that are being discussed here with Mr. Damitz and for construction, dredging, and debris sediment removal and storage will also be submitted for reimbursement from this grant. Mr. Damitz has also started work on the permitting process and on identifying a temporary staging site for sand removal from launch ramps so that it could later be used for beach nourishment at Surfers Beach. Due to unanticipated tasks and unexpected circumstances associated with this project, additional funding was needed to advance the project, and Mr. Damitz was awarded an additional $13,993 in February of 2018 to continue additional sediment testing, permitting, coordination, and stockpile site negotiation work. To date, all dredging stockpile permit applications have been submitted and the required environmental documentation has been completed, including eelgrass surveys, bathymetric surveys, wetland delineations, and sediment sampling and analysis. A stockpile site at Half Moon Bay Airport has been secured and permitted. The project invitation for bids was issued and bids are set to close on May 1st, 2019. As to the fiscal impacts, the current budget has $920,000 allocated for the launch ramp dredging services and Surfers Beach replenishment projects at Pillow Point Harbor. In addition, FEMA and Cal OES has committed emergency funds for this debris removal dredge episode, as I just mentioned. The district may be responsible for a 10% cost share, which may be offset by staff hours spent on this project. Any necessary funding for next fiscal year will be carried over from this year's budget as appropriate if you were to approve this item tonight. As mentioned before, our Director of Administrative Services is looking at mechanisms of carrying over funds since the appropriations will not occur during the budget cycle. Mr. Dowd's proposal is attached to the staff report, and he also has a presentation for this item. So I'll ask him to come again.
Thank you, Anita. Okay, so Anita pretty much stepped us through a lot of the background, and I'll try and make this one quick as well, but I'm sure there's going to be questions. We have some very quick timeline here that I just want to step you through so you can see that there's a trend here. So the launch ramps were first built in 1992 with grant funding from Department of Boating and Waterways. And then the first time they required dredging was 1998. The second time was 2006. The third time was 2013. So you're seeing every 6 to 8 years something happens and then it needs to be dredged. And it also usually happens as a surprise. It kind of just, they get shoaled up fairly quickly. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But so, and Anita mentioned this, when I came on board in 2016, we went out and even John went out, we did a survey, we looked at it, there was no shoaling on the ramps of any concern, so we kind of punted the boat launch maintenance to the Surfers Beach project instead of working on a project that wasn't needed at that time. Then fast forward to February of 2017, we had those big winter storms, I think some in January as well. There's an outfall, I'll show you the picture in a second. There's an outfall up here that drains Deer Creek that fills up with time, over time with sediment, and usually a lot of the fine stuff gets flushed out of it, and my theory is that the coarser stuff builds up over time until a really big flush comes through and just knocks it all out. Like happened again this winter, you can see, if you go down there now, you can see how the kind of sediment just has made a lazy river that keeps on shifting.
So is it usually the one on the right that fills up, or the one?
Yeah, so you can see this here, right? This is during a low tide.
Okay.
Basically, this is right after the dredging. There's the machine that they use, it's called long reach excavator. They put it out, and dredged all this. And then This is after that big storm
Okay.
in 2017, about a month after, during a really low tide, a boat trailer got stuck on it, and that's what alerted the harbor district. We got started immediately. The idea was that we should get the sand out of there as soon as possible, but we knew that from talking with the Coastal Commission, they wouldn't allow us to do anything other than beach nourishment with it if it was good quality sand. So we couldn't dispose it or put it in any of the spots it was put before. So we decided, let's just find a place to stockpile it until we can get the permits to actually do beach nourishment with it and use it, which is the harbor district's and the commission's direction we wanted to take. So anyways, that became a challenge. We looked at virtually every private and publicly owned site that would have been suitable in the area, and we had a lot of negotiations occurred. To make a long story short, after a year of approaching the county to use Half Moon Bay Airport stockpile site, we finally were approved and issued a permit fairly recently for use of the site, which required us to pay a rent. And full disclosure, as long as we store that material at the stockpile site, they charge the harbor district $4,500 per month, which is the incentive is to get it out of there as soon as possible. Not just because of that, but that's a big one, which will be covered by FEMA.
Is that 100% covered by FEMA?
I believe so, John. There may be that 10% cost share, but that can be offset, and certainly John has put plenty of hours, and so has Anita in this project. And the figure 390 is what we came up with working with FEMA based on other costs, trying to come up with a not to exceed, but getting it above the 350,000 mark where it becomes a large project. So if it does go above that number, they would still cover it.
Okay,
So
thanks.
here's a good picture of it.
Yeah.
You see,
We've seen this before too.
What's the pipe though? Can you go back one slide?
this
On the
this
left side, what is, I always thought that was Deer Creek.
No, I forget what that is. That's a drainage. I think it might drain the upper parking lot up here or something.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay,
storm drain.
Yeah.
okay, all right.
Yeah, so Deer Creek.
The creek is right there.
Ah, okay, I know.
Right now, this is all sand. It's a big wide beach right here.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
For that model.
Perfectly positioned.
Okay, and it's very good quality sand. We had it tested, and it's 97.5% coarse, most of it is. So we definitely do want to use it on the beach. Okay, so another thing I want to clarify here. So we have two phases of the project. The first phase is to get that sand out of there and move to the stockpile. That's what we're working on now. We actually received the Coastal Commission, CDP. Everything else is in process. It's out to bid. Things are actually moving forward on that. Phase two is what do we do with the material once it's on? We can't leave it at Half Moon Bay Airport. We want to get it out of there as soon and as reasonably possible. So phase two is to relocate the sand stockpile to a beach, generically, and I'll get into that in a minute. So accomplishments so far, and Anita touched on a lot of this, so I'll flip through it really quickly, but we did get all the permits for the county airport. And one of the problems was we couldn't finalize any of our other permit applications until we had the stockpile site secured, so that's why this has dragged on for quite some time. One of the reasons it has. So another interesting thing, I have given a presentation on this before, and we mentioned that the approach was to go for multi-year permit, so we could do more than one dredging episode. We changed the path on that because it would have taken longer for the Coastal Commission to issue the permit, and we wanted to do it as soon as possible. But also, because we're going to do it, we knew that Surfers Beach was coming, so as part of the Surfers, I didn't talk about this in my past presentation, but as part of that contract is to work with Army Corps of Engineers and Coastal Commission to get multi-year permit to complete dredging of the launch ramps and Surfers Beach for 10 years. Probably 5 years for the Coastal Commission with an easy renewal. So in lieu of doing that multi-year permit, we did get them to give us 5 years of what's called knockdown. So let's say we go out there in July, clear everything out, then next winter there's a big storm and it all gets flushed in there again. A knockdown would be they could get in there with an excavator and kind of push it into the deeper areas until later when we could do a bigger launch dredging project. So that's a big deal. We don't have to wait and get the full permits and everything. quick, we just show them some plans, some figures.
So that's done.
That's done as
So
of the
for
10th.
5 years, we can do that?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I just wanna make sure that that was connected with the CDP.
Yep.
Perfect.
And there's still requirements for the
Yeah.
CDP before it's active that we need to submit, but that's, that's all in the works.
In addition, we're focusing on the area immediately surrounding the launch ramp as the primary donor site for Surfers Beach, instead of like going.
That's a good point, John, yeah.
Wait, what is that primary donor side?
So when we're looking at which areas to take the sand from
Okay.
within the outer harbor,
Okay.
we're focusing on maintenance dredging number one. So if we can
Yeah.
take care of maintenance dredging needs and get the good quality sand, it's a no-brainer. So
Yes.
we're trying to
Okay.
deal with that. 1,600 cubic yards for this project is just an interim measure to make the boat ramps usable again.
Okay.
So that's not going to be a long-term thing. But since we have Surfers Beach planned, we're not worried about it. So with this knockdown, everything should be fine. Okay,
Is knocked down a term of art that's not left an interpretation, so that it's
That's right,
not
yeah.
viewed as dredging, and then we're gonna get stuck with not being able to do anything?
Yeah, and no, it's a distinct process,
Okay.
and they asked me, okay, what are you proposing to do? So we kind of came up with
You went through
the
that.
engineers, and
Okay,
so it's,
so
yeah,
it's settled, that part, so that we're not gonna have a problem with
you're not gonna have a problem, we're not gonna need to get a
Because
new
I think
permit.
that's important, to just make sure that there's that maintenance, level of maintenance.
Yeah. So phase two, the most important and pressing things, we need to find a site that's gonna be acceptable by regulatory agencies and the public, that is the quickest option to move it from the stockpile site back to a beach. In our permit applications to the Coastal Commission, we provided 3 options. One of them is Surfers Beach. I think to get the material from the airport to Surfers Beach presents some logistical challenges. May not be the ideal way, but it could be used for Surfers Beach for sure. The other one, which could be optimal if the timing is right, would be to use it for the West Trail, which would require 5,000 to 10,000 cubic yards. It's a small portion of it. But as we move forward with this programmatic permitting approach, we can identify down the road, future launch ramps, say, they take 5,000 to 7,000 cubic yards every 8 years or 6 years. Maybe you could say, okay, we'll put that on West Trail. There's all kinds of things, that you can kind of mesh the projects together. I think it's kind of exciting. So we need to find out something that the regulatory agencies and the public are going to approve of. So the second one is West Trail. The third one is the Princeton shoreline, where there's a lot of rock revetment. However, there's been some public concern about placing the sediment there that we would have to deal with. But I'm going to start those discussions as soon as possible as we move this forward. And get the permitting underway, because that takes some time for a project. I don't envision that placing 1,600 cubic yards on the beach, that's a fairly straightforward and simple project. But nonetheless, it's going to take a lot of back and forth with permitting agencies, and we need to get it started. And then there's a number of studies and things that have to happen. You have to do some surveys that come along with that.
So Brad, I want to visualize this because I'm having a hard time. You're talking about all these cubic yards, and that doesn't really mean anything to me. So are you saying that we're gonna take this new material that we are getting from the dredging of the boat launch ramp, which we need to do, and we're gonna move it into the pile at the airport that
Yeah.
hasn't started yet?
Right,
That's
it's going to become a new
a
pile.
new pile. Is there other material that's gonna be in that pile too, or it's just gonna be from this dredging?
This is just for this, we're only permitted to do 1,600 cubic yards from this
Okay.
particular dredging.
But what you're saying is that pile that's gonna go to the airport, that we have to pay the almost $5,000 a month to keep there.
Yeah.
That pile, if we were going to use it, it would be more than we need for, say, the West Shoreline Trail, or it would
It would be
be?
less than we would need, but it would be a nice, take a nice chunk out of it.
I see,
Would be a good way
okay.
to- And we're going to discuss that as part of the project, but there may be a way to use it early on, maybe place it somewhere where it could be reconfigured later.
So that it's not staying at the airport.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And in the future, I don't think that
Expensive.
that would ever happen again in any circumstance, that we have to stockpile material like this. This was just kind of being caught off guard and,
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we needed a place,
yeah.
quite frankly, but it's expensive.
Yeah. So, and then the phase two, the tasks that I put into that proposal were basically to just to oversee everything from doing the permitting, finding the site, doing the bid documents, working with the district, and, you know, getting the contractors on board, overseeing the process, making sure that they're meeting all the permitting conditions, everything until the project is complete. And that, end of that.
It's great.
But I guess to sum things up, you know, that finally we're in a spot where we know it's gonna happen in the near future. We've got bids coming in. You know, we know there's some interest in the project. We'll see how many bids on May 1st.
May 1st, okay.
Is there any discussion about pumping it over the seawall like they do in Santa Cruz and other places?
Yeah, that would be basically the Surfers Beach project. So I think we would do it in combination with that. I thought maybe you could use it to build, the way they're gonna do the Surfers Beach project is to build a containment berm on the outside and then fill that in. I thought maybe this could be used, you know, as part of that containment berm in the beginning or something. Santa Cruz has a different situation. They do have a multi-year permit and monitoring program, and that was, you know, probably decades in the making. But they also have a lot more sedimentation of their harbor, so they're dealing with, I don't know
Different.
how many cubic feet.
Constant.
Yeah, annual dredging needs.
I know at the Pacific Fishery Management meeting that just took place, the sanctuaries took a lot of grief over this launch ramp and our Surfers Beach project alone. And I've been told that there's some people that want to have meetings with not only the Greater Farallones Marine Sanctuary people and some others, possibly even a Congresswoman's aide, because there's a great deal of frustration of not being able to use this launch ramp.
So, yeah, I mean, to address that, to be fair, the launch ramp is outside of the sanctuary's jurisdiction. They're not, they have nothing, I mean, if you want to talk about slowing down the process, I could give you a list of other players in this. I don't want to do that, but it certainly wasn't the sanctuary. And then on top of that, they have been major supporters of the Surfers Beach project, and they're actually working very closely. So to say that they're not, you know, they're halting the project is definitely not true, and I can clear that up. They actually wrote a letter of support for the project. They've been very cooperative. However, their hands are tied in certain ways because they do have this regulation that they can't issue a permit for, but they did give us you know, a lot of wiggle room to work in that allows us to do our preferred project anyway. And as a secondary benefit, they are updating their regulations so that they're not going to have that in the future, so that they will be able to issue the permit. So it's just kind of backlash over many years of, you know, slowing projects like this down, but actually now they've been really engaged.
So it sounds like though that, just so I understand, if we're going to get proposals starting in May, is that right? Or are we putting
For
out
the
a-
launch ramp, yeah.
We've already got the invitation of bids already out.
So it doesn't sound like it's
launch
gonna be that long before that dredging happens, is that, like, is it like 6 months out, or?
No, that was one of the questions that came up from the contractors, and the way that we replied to it is we would like to do the project as soon as possible, June, even late May, but we understand that contractors have scheduling challenges and other commitments, and we don't want to kind of rule out getting a good field of bidders, because if we say, okay, I've already heard from people that they're not going to be able to do the project in June, so we don't want to say, nope, it has to be done in June, because then that would eliminate some of the
So, just since I'm hearing, and I think I've heard this before, that there's some people that are, like, with boat trailers that are concerned about the access, is there a way we could update the public so that they're informed, I'm looking at John, about the fact that we're doing this and that this is gonna get taken care of soon, so that we don't, you know, if people are running off to talk to congresswomen and whatnot, and we're about to do the project, it'd be nice to let them know that, so that they're not wasting their time, you know, with,
We'll continue to update our website and also,
maybe
you
we
know, meetings like this as well, and Brad will be returning again, if not next month, the following month. And staff and myself, do, communicate, relatively often ever since the the challenge originated at the launch ramp. And for the most part, people are understanding. As Commissioner Matoush said, it can be argued that because the sanctuary had the regulations not allowing us to immediately beneficially reuse the sand at Surfers Beach, which would have been the logical closest place to beneficially reuse it, that did make this all more challenging for us. But as Brad said, I think staff have done their very best to help us out, and we're doing, I believe, the right thing with beneficially reusing the sand instead of disposing it upland or something
well,
else.
I'm not talking about what we're doing with the sand.
Mhm.
That's all complicated, and it sounds like we're doing the best we can with that complicated situation. I'm just saying, could we like put up a you know, like just a poster or like an 8.5 by 11? Do we have like a bulletin board somewhere where we could inform voters that
Yes, we got.
here's the schedule, you know, here's what is happening, we expect to have this done around this time, or something like that, just so.
As soon as we pin something down, I think
Yeah, we
that
can
would be,
do that.
yeah,
Okay.
that would be
And,
excellent.
and then the other thing is, we could have a picture of dredging the boat launch ramp, one of those from here, and then we could put it on our Facebook page, our Instagram page, and our Twitter account, so that people can see it,
Yeah,
and then
that's
they
what I
can
was thinking.
share it.
That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking as well, we could put an update to Joe Fondini,
Yeah,
or Joe
that'd be-
Falcone for Fondini.
That'd be great,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
And as well, when we first applied when we first completed our coastal commission application, several, I don't even remember when that was, but we had it posted that it was an application up on the bulletin
Yeah.
board there. And then they also require all the local parcel numbers and, you know, people who live nearby, so.
Okay. I just something so it's easy for people to read, you know, like,
Yeah.
here's the, you know, here's what we think this, I know we can't give hard dates, but just so they know there's something in progress, I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. We'll loop back with John on that, we can definitely do that.
Okay. Is there any more discussion, or does someone want to make a motion?
I'll move to execute a professional, to authorize the interim general manager to execute a professional services agreement with consultant Brad Damitz for an amount not to exceed $47,700 for continued project management services for the Pillar Point Harbor Launch Ramp Dredge Project.
Second.
Okay, hearing no further discussion, can we get a roll call?
Commissioner Lorenz,
Hi.
Commissioner Shanker-Raleigh,
Aye.
Commissioner Riley,
Aye.
President Brennan,
Aye.
Commissioner Matoush.
Aye.
Okay, great, thank
very
you.
much, everyone.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
appreciate it. That was a lot of information.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, sorry to be on the agenda
You're
so
the
much
star
tonight.
of the show tonight.
Thank you very much, by the way, for changing the order of things.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
yeah,
Yeah,
We're gonna
thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
no reason for you to stay for the rest of this.
Glad you did that, Ed.
Thanks a lot. I'm excited about these projects.
So next week, we're going to go to item 10,
Yes.
which is the monthly capital projects update from Anita.
Okay.
So may I make a quick comment since I
Yes,
pulled it?
It was consent, yeah.
Yeah, it was, this item is on consent, and I don't think you need to go through every little bit,
Thank you.
but I did want to highlight the fact that there are a lot of projects that are moving forward, and we had some folks that were here earlier, but we just couldn't get to it, and one of the fellows talked about what's going on with Pillar Point Harbor RV Park, and so there's a nice list in the packet about what the district has been doing with respect to the RV park. That was the main reason I pulled it, so,
The public member was asking about it?
yeah.
So do you want do you want an update on that, or?
No, I just wanted to point out that the district has, I don't know how many items, did you know, they're not numbered, but there's probably 10 or 12 items that are moving along very nicely that we just put them on consent, because otherwise we'd be here till midnight going through all of them.
Okay.
And I just wanted to say to staff and everyone else that's been working on it, thank you very much.
Okay. Great. All right, so then let's go to item 12, which is the Oyster Point Marina Fuel System transfer to City of South San Francisco. And this is John.
This is a motion to authorize staff and district council to send formal notice to the city of South San Francisco of the district's intent to cease operation and maintenance of the fuel system at Oyster Point Marina by June 1, 2019. And for the public's benefit, I'll give a little history. The district manages the Oyster Point Marina for the city of South San Francisco, including the fuel system, through a 1977 joint powers agreement, a subsequent 2011 and 2018 memorandum of understanding, and a 2017 implementation agreement. The Oyster Point Marina fuel system was originally developed under a lease executed in 1984, and operation was subsequently sublet to a third party whose responsibility has been to maintain it. With the lease and land conveyance to facilitate the currently ongoing development project at Oyster Point Marina, the fuel system became no longer the district's responsibility to manage. In a combined effort to continue fuel service to the public, in September 2017, the district and South San Francisco agreed through the implementation agreement that the district would maintain temporary operation of the fuel system until its replacement, which was to be funded through a community facilities district. Meanwhile, the city of South San Francisco would set aside $90,000 to be available for fuel dock repairs at no cost to the district. On assuming responsibility for the fuel system, the district initiated immediate repairs for which South San Francisco reimbursed the district in accordance with the implementation agreement. The implementation agreement made clear that the Community Facilities District would be formed by April 2018 to fund the fuel system replacement. As regulatory agencies require the old single-walled underground storage tank and lines to be replaced by 2025. The district has allowed a third party to manage the fuel dock through a commercial activity permit, which continued fuel service to the public until recent challenges with the gasoline underground storage tank required its closure, cost for which the city of South San Francisco reimbursed the district. The gasoline underground storage tank closure negatively impacted all efforts the district's commercial activity permittee had made to instill public confidence in the fuel system. Therefore, even diesel sales have dropped off, no longer making it sustainable to operate the fuel system in its entirety. The little use and potential threat to the environment inherent with old single-walled underground storage tanks and the long length of underground fuel lines leading to the dispensers has led the district to move forward with emptying the diesel underground storage tank as well. The implementation agreement provides that the district may return responsibilities for the fuel system to the city of South San Francisco if the CFD did not come to fruition by April of 2018 and monies for design and engineering were not made available by December 31, 2018. The CFD is currently the subject of litigation, and a recent court ruling has made the likelihood of the CFD being funded very unlikely in the near future. In accordance with the implementation agreement, the district entered into meet and confer discussions with the city of South San Francisco. This meet and confer process is still ongoing. District Council sent a letter to the city attorney expressing the district's interest in transferring operation and maintenance of the fuel system back to the city. The implementation agreement states that if the district returns the fuel system to the city of South San Francisco, the city of South San Francisco may elect to continue operations or close the system. It is likely that if the fuel system is returned to the city of South San Francisco, the city of South San Francisco will permanently close the fuel system. Staff recommends the board approve a motion to authorize staff and district council to send formal notice to the city of South San Francisco of the district's intent to cease operations and maintenance of the fuel system at Oyster Point Marina by June 1, 2019. If the board approves the motion, staff and district council will work with city staff to effectuate the transfer of operations and maintenance.
Does anybody have any questions or discussion?
I think this definitely is the right move, transfer it back to the city because we don't want to undertake the expenses. However, in our entire agreement, I think that we've said that we would be responsible for maintaining a certain level of rentals and occupancy, and we'd be striving for this 80% mark. We're within 1.5% of that now. I just asked the board to consider, if you lose the fuel system there, should that consider further negotiation on maybe that 80% threshold is a little bold to follow, and should that percentage of our operating in good faith be lowered to some more reasonable amount if there's no fuel, diesel or gas at the facility?
I would
It's
say
a good point.
I would say that could be an argument we could make. And of course, before either party of the MOU was found in default, there would have to be good faith negotiations and arbitration. So maybe something that that we need to look into. The adjacent facility, Oyster Cove Marina, does not have a fuel dock. Many other local marinas don't have a fuel dock. But we will be monitoring, obviously, our occupancy level. And if we can demonstrate that because we've lost the marina's fueling capability, we have suffered a loss in occupancy, I think that we would be able to demonstrate that if it does occur, and we would be able to argue that the MOU requirements should be adjusted.
I was in the harbor here at Pillar Point this morning, and I can tell you there was a lot of yelling and shouting by people coming up to our fuel dock that shut down this entire week. And even the boats that were 15, 20 miles offshore were complaining that are they going to have enough fuel to make it through the week with no fuel here. Now that's on a temporary basis. If we're going to absolutely shut something down, lock, stock, and barrel, this is something to seriously consider for our long-range planning.
Understood, and it is, I think, important to remember that the district did its very best at the commissioner's direction to continue the fuel system operation as long as was possible. But it just so happens now that this old system, the gasoline at least, the gasoline underground storage tank had conflicting testing that required us to do the responsible thing for the environment and close it down. So our efforts to continue operating it, I believe the responsible thing to do is to cease. And the city of South San Francisco, of course, has an opportunity to fund the replacement of the fuel system should the boaters and the community put enough pressure for them to do so. They have that obvious ability to do so.
So, well, to piggyback off of what Tom is concerned about, what is the likelihood of being able to negotiate a lower number, given that the MOU is pretty firm?
I'll have to look more closely at that. We're focused mostly on the,
Fuel dock,
The
I
fuel
get
dock
it,
item.
but I mean, these are the consequences of
yeah, no,
this.
it's a really good question, and I'm happy to look more deeply into that.
Wouldn't that be a better topic for a closed session?
I'd have to think about that.
It might very well be, but it also, again, might very well be that, that we don't see a significant drop in occupancy.
Right,
I think it's something we need to monitor, because
Yeah.
even if in fact our occupancy remains at 80%, but the district ends up, in accordance with the MOU, making a substantial investment in capital improvement projects and in dock replacement,
right. I mean, nothing.
then
simple
our
right now.
expectation maybe should not be just 80%
Right,
occupancy. So we'll have to look and see.
Well, another point, and maybe this is what you're kind of saying, is if we're gonna be spending, what is it, over $5 million on new docks, the understanding at the time that that decision was made was that there was going to be a working fuel system. And so this changes the whole situation. You know, it means that South San Francisco isn't keeping up their end of the bargain and maintaining the facility in a way that they say they want this state-of-the-art marina, but, you know, that would include a fuel system. So I'm just saying, I think maybe we should have a discussion further on this at a later time. And I agree with all the concerns that have been brought up. I think they're good points, because this is a, you know, significant change that we should consider the implications.
Motion to authorize staff and district council to send formal notice to the city of South San Francisco of the district's intent to cease operation and maintenance of the fuel system at Oyster Point Marina by June 1, 2019.
Second.
Since there's no further discussion, can we get a roll call?
Commissioner Ryder?
Aye.
President Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli?
aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Tush?
Aye.
So next we have, that was 1213, which is preliminary budget for fiscal year 2019-20. Adopt resolution number 19-08, and this is Julie's report.
Good evening, President Brennan and Commissioners. This discussion item 13 presents a preliminary budget for fiscal year 2019-20. The budget as presented includes some minimal changes to the numbers as compared to what was presented to the board meeting in March. Included in the changes is an increase in the cost of the pier terminus and dock replacements over the next 5 years, and a decrease in the 2020 and 2022 election costs, update of current year projections to include the spending of the admin office reserve, and increase in election costs by $20,000. In addition, staff has added some new sections in an effort to incorporate the Government Finance Officers Association recommended best budget practices. These sections include priorities and issues to be updated upon adoption of district goals, a list of short-term factors influencing decisions, public versus enterprise services, and an organizational chart. The Finance Committee met on April 11th to review and comment on the preliminary budget as presented. The following presentation, I'll go through some of the recommended changes to the district's budget document as I understand it. First, I'd like you to turn to page 2 of the budget document, or 13-6. And you'll see a table of contents. The Finance Committee would like to see two budgets. One, which would be a 2019-20 operating budget, and the other would be a 5-year capital improvement plan or program. The blue-colored items would be added to the table of contents. The capital-related schedules would be moved to the capital improvement program or plan section of the budget document. So everything there that's identified in blue would be the added sections, high-level sections to this table of contents. Some key items to understand as we go through this process of separating the operating versus the capital improvement program is that the capital budget, there will be a line item that would be included in the 2019-20 operating budget and which approves appropriations. It is a plan of the proposed capital outlays and the means of financing them for the 2019-20 fiscal period. And as Anita mentioned, we're moving away from approving appropriations in a large chunk. What we'll do is we'll take the capital budget items that have already been identified and approved by this board and move them forward into the 2019-20 operating budget, and maybe add a little bit of money for things that are underneath the general manager's authority of $25,000. So there'll be a little bucket that will be discretionary, but the board would, or the staff would only have the authority to spend appropriations at the capital level once this board approves the spending of those funds. The other section of the budget would be the capital improvement program, and that will be included as a separate section of the budget document, and the board does not approve appropriations as part of that process. It is a plan for current and future projects related to the acquisition, expansion, or rehabilitation of capital assets. And the next key term is capital assets. Per district policy 4.7.1, the district defines a capital asset if the cost of the asset is $10,000 or greater and has a useful life of 5 years or more. If you want to turn to page 4 of the preliminary budget document, you'll see a little summary, and this is at the level of what the board adopts the budget at. So for example,
Is it, which, I'm sorry.
it's 13-8, page 4 of the budget document.
Okay, 13-8.
And as a comparison of what is presented in the preliminary budget versus the input of the finance committee, is what we would do is we would take out the line item that says capital asset expenditures, which is presented in the preliminary budget as $7.9 million, and is added to total expenditures, and then it shows total revenues less expenditures as a negative $4.1 million. Well, in this new way of presenting, you would take out the capital asset expenditures because those are going to be moved into the capital improvement plan program. And it shows that revenues less expenditures is $3,762,000. That $3.7 million can be used to fund future capital improvement projects, one-time expenditures, and any emergency reserves per our district policy.
Julie, are you gonna have all of this integrated for the second look? Because this is very difficult for me to see, basically two documents have not been merged yet.
Yes,
Okay.
in May,
This
this
is all gonna be
document,
integrated.
it will all be integrated.
Okay.
Tonight, because of, the timing of the finance committee and
yeah.
the board
It's just
meeting.
very difficult to look at the two and picture how this is going to be, but, okay.
Yeah, and I'm going through this at a very high level, so.
No, I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, readability.
Okay, and so if you want to turn to page 13 of the budget document, which is 13-17. This was a section that was added, it was public versus enterprise funds. We currently receive tax revenue and interest on investments that equates to approximately 60% of our entire revenue stream. The other 40% is in enterprise revenue, which is all the berth and slip fees, boat launch, property rentals, and permit fees, etc. The public activities that are financed by our tax revenues include trail access and maintenance and a portion of the dock and pier maintenance, public fishing piers, public parking, search and rescue, and public restrooms. On the enterprise side of things, our intent is to charge fees to support the enterprise functions, and those revenues would also go to a portion of the dock and pier maintenance, commercial and recreational fishing, vessel destruction, enforcement of business activities, and tenant restrooms. The finance committee asked the staff do additional analysis on the split between the public and enterprise, so the next draft of this budget, which will be in May, will include additional information on that split.
And what kind of information is that?
It's looking at, the capital programs and whether they're partially public, partially enterprise, maybe splitting these high level, like salary, wages, and benefits subtotals into more detail of what
I mean, because
key
we were asked,
expenses.
that's been asked of before today, in terms of, the overlap of employees in terms of, time, what is the allocation of time and vis-a-vis compensation for public versus enterprise, so, yeah, definitely that needs to be, I think I asked for that 2 years ago.
Yeah, and that's something that staff has been doing. They're actually tracking their hours in
It's
the
hard to
payroll
get
system.
It was in the budget last year
Yeah,
too. That
but
part
it
was, but
was-
she's doing additional to that, not just the staff time part versus public, but also what she just said about looking at each individual capital project and seeing what part of it might be beneficial to the public and what part of it is private or enterprise related.
Yeah, so that's gonna be basically, if you look at this, in your presentation, where's that section where it's gonna be in addition to the budget, is it this operating budget? Anyway, can you kind of walk me through how you're gonna do that to analyze it down more specifically, I guess? And I'm not saying it's better, I would prefer that, so, but I'm just curious.
Well, and so, for instance, right now our operations people are in the payroll system, they're inputting their hours on what they determine that they're spending on enterprise activities versus operational activities. The rest of the items is like, well, for instance, insurance. How much property insurance do we pay for,
Our tenants.
our enterprise functions versus our public functions?
Right.
So the tenant row.
Right.
If we have any property insurance on tenant row, that will go into the enterprise section. If we have insurance on a public bathroom, it will go into the public activities section. So it's just a methodology to get more detail in the allocation of the particular line items into the public and enterprise
Okay.
buckets.
Okay, thanks.
So the next page is the organizational chart. And it was just very difficult to read the organizational chart that's included in the budget document, so I presented it here so that you would have a reference to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we hear? This is so much clearer.
This is much better from here.
Yeah.
I think it's the white
Yeah,
on
'cause that's
navy
the one that was
blue,
on
right?
Right.
Thank you.
It's the color combination.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, this is just, is something that GFOA recommends as one of the best budget practices. And
Yeah.
that's why that's included in this document. If you want to turn now to page 13-24-20.
Julie, could we put the public above the board in the chart?
Of course.
That'd
yes.
be great.
So this is just a recap of last month's presentation, a little bit different look at our revenues. Our district property taxes are expected to increase about 2%, so you'll see in the blue a little jump in property taxes. Operating revenues are expected to increase slightly by 2.25% due to inflationary items offset by losses of lease revenue at OPM. And you'll see the birth and slip fees are pretty there's not much growth in any of the other items on the revenue. District expenses are expected to decrease by 25.54%, with salaries, wages, and benefits are projected to decrease by 27.33% due to not including the CalPERS long-term liability of $2.3 million. That number is not included in the fiscal year 2019-20 budget. If you take that out and show it separately, this graph shows the labor costs are increasing. That's the blue line at the top. So labor costs are expected to go up about 6.4%. Contract services are expected to go from $583,000 to $623,000. Legal services from $550,000 to down slightly to a little over $500,000. Utilities from $350,000 to $438,000 because we're saving money by being on generators at Oyster Point Marina right now. And the CalPERS and election costs are only shown in fiscal year 2018-19, which is shown in those green pyramids in the middle. If you want
So
to,
this does not include the UALs.
right, so this shows the progression
Yeah.
of salary costs actually increasing and
Right,
it's
no, I
separating,
get it.
yeah.
So, are we gonna have something that might show the trend of the UALs?
For the, we could include a
Yes.
projected trend
Yeah, I
of the
would love to.
UAL. There's a lot of variables
I know.
and
I
a
know.
lot of
It's not gonna be easy.
assumptions that
Yeah.
I would need to make in order to do that, but I could come up with something. Market conditions is the biggest thing.
Yeah, but the CalPERS discount rate is pretty firm, right?
The CalPERS discount rate is projected to be decreased over the next at least couple of years. CalPERS is
From-
not making the money that they initially assumed that they were going to make, and so over the next couple of years, that discount rate is going to
Do we know that?
decrease.
Because over a 20-year period, it's only decreased over like 0.75%.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head the percentage that it's going to decrease. I'd have to bring that, and I can send you that information, yeah.
I mean, I just want to make sure that not to go overboard beyond the NASB 60, but that it's someplace that's legible. I mean, like for the layperson too.
Okay, and we're expecting next month in May that we'll have our audited financial statements that will have a lot of information about the long-term liability amounts. Now, if you want to turn to page 29,
The capital improvement.
29 is 13-33, it's the 5-year projected working capital. This is going to show what's presented here, where you show working capital ending balance as, you know, decreasing to below zero over time. This new way of presenting the budget with only looking at the operating budget, you'll see that in 2018-19, we have about $500,000 decrease in our working capital balance. But then every year after that, we're projected that our revenues are going to exceed our expenditures, our operating expenditures, and that the little green lines represent the increase in the working capital. For example, in fiscal year 2019-20, we'll have about $2.5 million that can be used to fund our capital improvement program. And then in 2021, the increase in working capital is a little bit lower because that's an election year and we'll have to pay for some election costs, and then it goes back up a little, back down every other year. Will be between 1.2 million and 2.6 million of monies that can be used for one-time expenditures, for the capital improvement projects, and it could potentially in the future, keeping that gap, be used for any debt service payments if we have really large projects that we need to fund in the future. So that's a good place for the district to be.
So for the expenditures in the orange bars, can you walk me through that like you did for the working capital? I get the working capital part.
Right, so you'll see the revenues are continually
Yeah,
going up a little
No,
bit.
but not that much compared to, I mean, it looks like the expenses are definitely more volatile than the,
And
and I
that's,
guess that the working capital will offset that, I guess, right?
right, so if you added the green bar on top of the orange bar, then they would be even.
Yeah, that makes sense, okay.
And it's really, every other year, you have big election costs.
Which is that, well, 2019-20 is that factoring that election cost? I can't remember.
No, so
I didn't-
2021 is
Is
the
the
next
election
election
cost,
cost. So you'll see the expenditures going up.
Okay, but
Then
then.
it goes back down because 2021, 22 doesn't have election costs. And then 22,
We'll go
23
back up.
goes back up. And the progression is that because of salary increases and
Okay, That's
inflationary
what I was gonna ask,
increases.
because the difference between 1920 and 21-22, which are both non-election costs, I mean, it's still going up, and it's still gonna go up in 23-24, which is not an election year either, right?
Yeah, it's.
Versus 21-22. Okay, I'm just trying to get it straight in my head, but okay, and that's gonna be salary increases and
Inflationary
Yeah,
increases,
Okay.
just as costs go
Okay.
up, but there's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
projection
that's
of like
what
a
the-
5% increase.
yeah, I saw that in here, okay, thanks. Just a little confusing, I don't get it.
Okay, and this slide shows the capital improvement program, and that's what's included in this preliminary budget. We'll probably make some changes based on the finance committee's direction, but this reflects, if you turn back to page 13-28 or page 24 of your budget document.
Yeah,
You have the Pillar Point Harbor, Oyster Point Marina, and administrative capital projects. And another part of the capital improvement program or plan is going to include some of these projects. And I left these up here to kind of go through them to give you an idea of what the 1920 operating budget might look like. So things like buying 2 motors for the Challenger, I would think that we could include that in the 1920 operating budget. It's not really a capital improvement program. It's more that we need to buy a capital asset. So staff is recommending that that kind of capital asset be included in the operating budget portion of this document. The replacement of docks 12 and 13, there will not be any appropriations approved until such time as staff brings forward a staff report asking for appropriations for that project, whether preliminary engineering and design or construction appropriations. The 40,000 square foot commercial partial, we would include appropriation for design and engineering, because my understanding is that that has already been approved by this board.
What is that? I'm sorry, what is that project?
John, can you talk about that? And is that correct?
We've not even yet had that 40,000 square foot parcel defined
Right.
at Oyster Point yet.
Okay.
So it was, it's been brought to the board in the past, and it's been a placeholder in our budget, you know, as we've kind of tried to allocate and project forward monies that could be spent, you know, on capital improvement projects. And at some point, once that 40,000 square foot area, that commercial parcel is designated, defined and designated, that the district's entitled to at Oyster Point, in accordance with the MOU, we would then come to the board to and reach out to the community to try to determine what the best use of that 40,000 square foot would be. And first, part of that would be design engineering for whatever we decide the best use would be, highest and best use.
So then we would probably bring this appropriation, the board would approve it during the time when we bring that design engineering contract to the board. For Pillar Point Harbor, these are some of the projects that we were just going over, the West Trail erosion protection, surfers beach sand. And so we'll look at each of these, we'll look at what's already been approved by the board, and we'll come up with a mechanism to make sure that regardless of the cutoff date, like June 30th, 2019, that those appropriations will move forward from year to year. Probably using an encumbrance accounting method, which is a way to save prior years resources to move forward for contracts that you've entered into in the current year.
Could you explain that in a different way, just so it's easier for anybody watching this to understand?
So encumbrance accounting is a budgetary term that is used to set aside current year budget resources for future fiscal year periods. So for example, we have a $1.3 million preliminary engineering design contract for the Johnson Pier HDOC project. We're not going to spend $1.3 million by June 30th, 2019. We may spend, say, $200,000. The other 1.1 million will go into an encumbrance account, and we'll be able to spend out of that encumbrance account in fiscal year 2019-20.
Okay.
And that's gonna be like a separate fund, there's gonna be an indication that that's gonna be separate right in the budget.
Yes, it requires some procedures to be implemented and a process to make sure that there's a list of open encumbrances the staff and the board can
It's gonna take work, yeah.
But that's just because the way we're changing, in the past, we've approved we've approved one budget. It had capital budget, it had operating budget, and now we're not gonna approve the capital budget. All we're doing is approving a capital plan, and this 5-year is just a plan now rather than a budget document. So every
why are
time,
we changing? That's a pretty drastic change, in my opinion.
it was a recommendation at the finance committee, and
A recommendation that never came to the board?
I think that,
It's something we've talked about for years.
Not to eliminate the capital budget.
and
That's
this
not the
is,
in my mind, it's not the same thing as a capital plan, improvement plan.
You're
Sorry. Oh, you need me to speak louder?
No,
No.
Bud wants to speak, and he's on the finance committee, as a member of the finance committee, so why don't you stand up and speak, Bud?
We had discussions at the finance committee, and I'd like to back up a little bit and talk about some philosophy of budgeting. An operating budget should be continuing operations on what's happened, so that you can identify trends and trends in the revenues, trends in expenditures, and how those trends from continuing operations relate to each other. And that helps inform a strategic plan, and a strategic plan also informs of possible changes in the rate of change within those revenue and expenditure streams. It also, your operations then, you generate from those operations, since we're on the cash basis, you generate funds. Say you have a surplus, as was identified here. And those funds then are what are available for capital expenditures. And capital
Well,
expenditures.
that assumes that that's what the board wants. They don't necessarily have to go to capital expenditures, right?
Please, let me
Okay.
finish. And so, by projecting the operating budget out of continuing operations, you can identify trends and things like that. You don't have dislocations in the operating budget from one year you have $5 million of capital expenditures, the next year you have 2, and the following year you have 3. So your operating budget, as in the past, has bounced all over the place. And so when you compare year to year, you have to know what events cause changes.
Correct.
Whereas if you take those capital expenditures out of the operating budget and put them into a capital budget.
I understand that.
Okay, and that's what is happening here. And then you'll come along and projects, and you will generate funds, which are sources for your capital
Yeah.
budget expenditures. And you can forecast those out fairly accurately because you have continuing operations going out into the future. And so I'm gonna generate, 3 billion, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, whatever for capital budgets. Then you've got capital needs over here that greatly exceed what funds you are generating. And that causes that issue to come into view. And then you could say, well, how am I gonna meet these capital needs, and do I need this one? You go out and find other sources of funds, etc. And you do that capital planning. And then as projects are developed, you approve them because they fit in and they're a part of a plan. And you're just not doing a project here and a project here and whoops, I'm out of money and I got this really critical project I need to do. Whereas if you're forecasting and doing good capital planning, you can see that conflict arising in the future. And it will, I think, enable you to really get a much clearer picture of what the finances of the district really are over time and what trends are occurring, and the ability to judge one capital project against another and inform your approval of limited resources against pretty large needs, or incentivize you to go out and find other sources of funds. And that's,
It's
I
just,
think
I'm
that's
not,
the
I'm not
philosophy.
disagreeing with the philosophy or agreeing. I guess it just has come as a surprise because the board has never really discussed that would be, it's a recommendation. But this is the first time I've heard about this, so I appreciate the work, but I do.
So we asked to look at the budget that way.
The finance committee asked to look at the budget that way,
The
not
fin-
the
And
board.
represent-
So I'm
Yeah, the
speaking for the finance committee as a member of the finance committee, and we did appreciate Bud's input. We have been talking with Bud about this concept since I founded the finance committee, whatever year that was,
For years,
several years ago.
so several years.
And so it's not like coming as a surprise to
Actually,
some of
it
us,
is.
but I think as we move into, master plan, we're going to really need this way of doing things, because there's going to be an overwhelming number of projects when we start contemplating all that would need to be done to meet, a master plan, or to implement a master plan. And so I think we have to really start thinking in terms of how do we prioritize things, because there isn't gonna be enough money for all of it, and there's gonna need to be some very thoughtful planning about how we're meeting our strategic planning goals and how we can implement strategic plan goals in the best way possible.
I'd like to say something real quick.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you helping us with this. It's a good, really great input. And one aspect that wasn't made clear is that it's not only for the board to be able to do this kind of planning, but it will also make it very clear to our public how we're spending our resources, and they can look at what we're doing and also see how these funds and expenses are playing with each other, and when they come to talk to us about what the projects that they like better, they can actually see the cost versus what we have in our budget and whether we need to look for monies. It's an excellent tool for providing the public more clarity of how we're using our finances. It's one reason I really like it.
Well, since this is the first time I'm actually seeing this, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I do appreciate your work. I guess at the next iteration of this, we'll get all of this integrated and I'll take a look at it again.
Yes, that's the plan. And this is this is a presentation to describe what it might look like
Yeah, no, I get
the
it.
next time.
And this was a lot of work for Julie to do, by the way, in a short
Oh, no, I know.
time frame.
I
So
know. But preparing the budget in general is a lot
it
of
is,
work.
it is, yeah.
But preparing a budget with, changes is obviously more work, which is fine. It's just, this is the first time I'm hearing about this, which is exactly like the preliminary budget, I get it.
Well, the only change, if I could just make one comment, is that what it's gonna lead to, it's a different philosophy in how you're gonna deal with it, but what it's gonna lead
That's
to
what
is,
I mean.
instead of projects being approved, the appropriations for projects being approved at one time during the budget process, none of the appropriations will be approved at that time, so there'll be an extra step where anytime we want to approve a project, we'll have to come here first to the board, get the approval, and then appropriate the funds. And if there's projects that overlap over years, the accounting staff's gonna have to keep track as to how much was spent, what needs to be encumbered, so that that money's there. Can be carried forward. And we were already coming to the board every time we wanted to do a project. And I would have to just agree with Mr. Ratz, we were putting exactly what project was gonna be budgeted for how much in the coming year. So we were being very transparent about it. But the only difference now is that there will be a little more control by the board as to when the appropriations happen, so that they don't happen during the budget process, but whenever a new project is considered, the appropriations happen at that time. There'll be a little more work for the accounting staff to track it all, because a lot of these projects go on for multi-years, and we'll have to just track of how much is needing, to be accounted for, so. And that's.
No, I get the change.
So it'll be
But
more
I
in
get
real
the
time.
Well, or you can look at it in a different way where priorities could be shifted. So, I mean, that's why I want to process all of this. This is, like I said, the first time I'm actually hearing.
But we were
No, I'm not, I
Yeah.
totally agree with you on that. I mean, that's not, it is a philosophy, it's a philosophical thing, so that's what I'm just processing. I'm not saying it's bad or good, I just haven't had a chance to think about
Just a
it.
different way of doing it.
Yeah.
And there is, a couple things that we're doing upfront in order to, implement this, is moving the budget document around. But we already track the balances
Yeah.
on the contracts. We already have that information, we already have someone doing that. So that's not going to cause extra work. And adding the appropriation at the time when the design and engineering contract is signed, or when the construction contract is signed, you already have to bring that to the board. The only time that you don't is when it's underneath the general manager's
Discretion.
authority of $25,000. And I don't know if you remember, but I talked about including a small amount in the budget to take care of those
Yeah, that was.
items.
Yeah.
So I don't wanna, completely disagree with Anita, because there is a lot of more upfront work, and it's a change, and, wrapping your head around changes and how to do things differently. But I think that
the unintended consequences, that's what I'm thinking through.
Yeah, there's just, well, again, I go back to my experience at the City of San Diego, we had encumbrances, and then you had to every year look at all your encumbrances and see what needed to be released. Because some encumbrances, because the times change and you don't know how much money you're gonna need, how much you're gonna keep. So you were constantly looking at, and that was a lot of work, and it had to be done before the new fiscal year started. So there was a lot of work. Here, because we're a small district, maybe it won't be as much work. So I'll leave it up to Julie's, experience as to what she feels the accounting staff needs or not needs to do. I'm just talking from my experience.
Thanks.
Alright, so this is the Pillar Point
Motion.
Harbor. And so appropriations for Surfers Beach, that will be something that, we'll make sure that we have in there. There's a lot on dredging, the things that we have approved tonight,
Yeah.
and the appropriations for the design and engineering for the Johnson Pier Terminus project. And
So I'd like to make a motion, unless there's more comments. That we adopt resolution 10-19-08, approving the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2019/20, with the following changes. The preliminary budget shall contain 2 distinct sections: operating budget, capital plan budget. The budget shall contain appropriations for already approved capital projects and vehicle and vessel replacements. The appropriations for all other estimated costs associated with capital projects shall not be part of the 2019-20 operating budget. It is the intent of this board to amend the budget appropriations when a capital project is presented to the board. And the board agrees that the project should proceed. And 3, the capital plan.
What was the last thing, Ed? The board what? Agrees to what?
I'll read that sentence.
Yeah, sorry,
again.
I'm trying to
That's okay.
find the.
It's a long sentence. Okay, the appropriations for all other estimated costs associated with capital projects shall not be part of the 2019-20 operating budget. It is the intent of this board to amend budget appropriations when a capital project is presented to this board, and the board agrees that the project should proceed. And 3, the capital plan budget section of the document is a planning tool and shall not include reference to appropriations.
And I'm sorry, did you write that out? Because I
Yeah,
didn't.
because it's not in here
I was
at
gonna
all.
say, I'll need to get that, I couldn't write that
Yeah.
out.
It's not in the staff report.
Yeah,
No,
so
it's-
I have a real problem approving something that's not even, hasn't even been that's not in here. And that's why I was a little confused so I can't approve it. I'd like to see the changes made, because I think that, some of the changes that are reasonable, but I don't want to approve something where we're so locked that there's no flexibility to change another preliminary after the, a second look, because we have 3 looks, right, at the budget before the final's approved.
Well, and so the timing of the adoption of the preliminary budget, I mean, I guess one option is to adopt the preliminary budget as it is.
But that's not what
And,
Commissioner Lorenz is
right,
saying.
right, well, and so the preliminary budget, if you adopt it as is, then we do an advertisement to the public to comment on the preliminary budget, but the preliminary budget doesn't necessarily reflect all of the changes that we discussed here tonight.
Right, I would feel much more comfortable with that.
And so if we discuss what's here tonight is that we are adopting the preliminary budget with the changes that
Suggested
Commissioner
changes.
Lorenz,
I'm sorry,
Right.
I can't hear
His,
you
mo-
very
we're
well.
talking, his motion is what she's talking about.
So
yeah.
what this is, it's a written out from Julie, which is exactly what we've been talking about, and I'm just proposing since we discussed this, that we adopt it as part of the resolution.
Well,
So
y'all
we can just
discussed
vote
it,
on
I
it.
wanted to digest it before I do.
Do you wanna
anything.
read it another time? 'Cause it's.
No, I'm not gonna approve it
Okay, well, you
until
can vote
I,
on it,
Well, I'll second the motion.
so we can vote.
Is there any further discussion?
Nancy?
No, I'm good.
Okay, can we have a roll call, please?
And can I be sure and get a copy of that so we
Yes.
can reflect it?
Julie has it. It's from her.
Oh, okay. Commissioner Shankarelli?
no,
Commissioner Ryder?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Matoush?
No.
Commissioner Brennan, or President Brennan?
Aye.
okay.
Okay. So next we have item 7, which was originally on consent,
Yeah,
and
I pulled
you
it.
pulled that, okay. So that's authorized expenditure of funds for temporary staffing services not to exceed 300,000. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So is this, what is this? I know what it's for, but do we have positions where we need to have temporary staffing be done? Or is this just a blanket approval up to 300,000 in case we need it?
No, we have several positions that are vacant.
Is that
This is my
this?
item.
Yeah, sorry,
um,
maybe I missed something here.
If we were to look at Julie's org chart and the presentation, I can, this was
I just
the
missed
Oh, that's
org
in here.
chart in the presentation.
Okay, let's look at that. Got it?
Yeah, so right now, we have a lot of vacancies. On the left-hand column, the project coordinator position is vacant, planner analyst position is vacant. And the director of administrative services, the accountant just resigned and took another position, so with another agency.
I'm sorry, we got project coordinator, planner analyst, director of administrative services. I missed one. What was it?
No, not
No.
director of administrative,
Oh.
director of
Is it
administrative
the
services
accounting
is Phil,
specialist?
that's Julie, the accountant. David Doyle's
Oh,
position.
here, got it.
Which
Okay,
one?
right here.
Accountant under
Oh,
directors.
accountant, okay,
It's under the administrative services.
okay.
And
And
the
then,
senior administrative analyst is vacant.
so that's 4 so far?
Yeah, that's just the
And the
admin
accounting
section.
specialist is vacant.
And the
too.
accounting specialist is vacant.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So that's 5.
Those are all administrative positions that work in this building or in this area. So, and that's not counting any of the operational positions, like the
Right.
harbors. So what this item number 7 is doing is asking for funding to fill these types of positions with temporary staff. And if you look at the chart that's in the staff report,
This, the table.
yeah, the table on the second page of the staff report, 7-2, will show you that in the past, when we've had vacancies, in fiscal year 2015-16, we spent almost $560,000 on temporary staff. In 2016-17, we spent $458,000 on temporary staff.
I'm less concerned about the numbers than I am about how none of these positions were mentioned in the staff report, which was my source of confusion.
Okay, let me go through the staff
Unless I'm
report.
I only have one page, right?
Yeah, do you want me to just read through my bullet points as far as talking about the staff report?
Well, why don't you just tell us what the plan is
Well, I
to
mean,
hire
am I
these
the only
positions?
people- only person
Isn't
who
that what
has
we
that?
want to know?
Yeah, go
How,
ahead.
what are we gonna do to fill these positions?
Well, we've tried. We've had, actually, while I was the Director of Administrative Services, we interviewed for Senior Administrative Analyst position, we interviewed for the Accounting Specialist position. The accountant position wasn't vacant at the time. Both of those became very challenging because of the location of the district. Even to get temporary staff, sometimes it's hard for Robert Half type of agency to find people that are willing to drive to Half Moon Bay for a temporary position. And when I interviewed for the senior, I only got 3 candidates. I had 5 to begin with. RGS helped with the recruitment. Out of the 5, only 3 showed up, 2 canceled at the last minute. Out of the 3, 1 was a phone interview. And I'll just be honest, the other 2 did not meet my criteria, so I didn't fill the position at the time. And then I've decided to wait till we had a new Director of Administrative Services because that position was going to be a key position. Same with the Accounting Specialist. Boomer Hanthorne, our Accounting Manager, interviewed candidates for that position. Did not like any of them, decided not to fill it. Didn't have a very big pool of candidates. So it's challenging.
Yeah.
Because of the location of the district and because of the job market right now.
Mhm.
There just aren't that many qualified candidates out there. So what we are trying to do is stopgap measure, try and fill with temporary staff. And we don't want to limit ourselves just to these 2 agencies, RGS and Robert Half, because we found that there are other agencies in the Bay Area that might have this capability of providing us with temporary staff that we need depending on the position. So all this item is doing is asking to budget a certain amount of money that we feel will last us throughout the fiscal year, that's $300,000, and to be able to not be tied to these 2 agencies, RGS and Robert Half, and be able to
Flexibility.
throw out a bigger net.
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
get them.
that's the key thing, is that in the past, we have just gone to the board for approval for a professional services agreement with Robert Half, with one specific
Right.
service vendor. We're wanting to just get an approval for an amount, and then be able to choose the service provider that best suits that particular need, and not be restricted, as we have kind of in the past, to whatever any particular vendor can provide. Because we do actually, for these temporary persons, we actually do interview them. So
Yeah, there's
they
a
give us
process.
they give us a couple people to interview. If none of those from that agency are satisfactory, we're paying for this, so we want to get the best candidates.
Exactly.
Can I just chime in for a second about this? So I'm really glad that we're gonna have more flexibility, and I didn't read this carefully enough to realize that. And I'm glad this item was pulled so we could learn more about this, and because I'm interested that we have that many positions that aren't filled, because I know that's gotta be really hard on the staff that we do have. Just thinking off the top of my head, the company that my wife works for, which is located in Fremont, they hire an accountant who has his own business, who comes to their company like, I don't know, a few days a month or once a week or whatever that they need. And Amy's commuting 4 days a week and working from home 1 day a week from Moss Beach to Fremont. This accountant guy is usually working out of his house, but when he needs to come in to do things like with inventory, which is their thing, he's commuting from El Granada. So, I know there are people that do accounting on the coast that have businesses that do it. So maybe we could be using one of these small businesses to, help us, and some of the work that they're doing, I don't know if they need to physically, if our system's set up so that they have to physically be here, or...
Well, our accountant that we lost,
Mhm.
he was commuting from San Jose. And we did allow him that flexibility. He was working from home 1-2 days a week.
He was cool.
And he was good, but our district is small, and he wanted to go to a bigger organization so that he'd have more opportunities for advancement. So there's, all kinds of reasons why people don't stay. But that would be up to Julie if she thinks that she can use it, be like using a consultant, rather than having somebody in-house. And
I mean, if it was like, it might be nice to have a couple consultants like that on hand for times like this, that are already familiar with the district, that are maybe locals, that have their own little accounting businesses, versus having to go to these big RGS or Robert Half or whatever, because those places, you're never gonna get the same person if you need them again later. And if you had a relationship with a smaller business, it would seem like you could then tap that resource as you need it, and then they could fill in, like if somebody was on maternity leave or something like that. It's just an idea, I don't know, private sector type of idea.
No, I mean, I don't totally disagree. My point was that I didn't feel like we had enough information in the staff report, which is the reason I pulled it.
Yeah. Well, this
I
is,
mean, I thank you for that explanation, Anita, because I didn't realize that the flexibility wasn't there. So, I mean, I'm okay to approve it if that helps you
well, it'll help Julie
a
more
lot.
than
Or
me.
y'all, y'all.
Because that's where we use temp staff more, is on the
Okay.
administrative side.
Okay, well, I'll
I
make a
just-
motion to authorize the interim general manager to execute service agreements with Robert Half Accountant's office team, RGS, and other such agencies for temporary staffing needs as appropriate for a total not to exceed $300,000.
and I'll second. Can we get a roll call?
Comments? Are there any
Commissioner
other
Matoush?
Aye.
Commissioner Lorenz?
Aye.
Commissioner Chancarelli?
Aye.
President Brennan?
Aye.
Commissioner Gregory?
Aye.
No, I think that was helpful to get the report.
Thank you, Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, now
Thanks, Anita, I needed that explanation.
we're moving on to,
I think we're done with all of the
We've
agenda
got-
items.
yeah, what do we do next? We have these, E, F, G, I get confused on this part of the agenda, H and I.
Probably more information.
Do we need to have any of these things, or can we end the meeting? Or any of these things
I'll make a
important?
motion to adjourn the meeting.
We can end the meeting now.
Okay, there's nothing critical that we're missing out on?
No.
No, we put in H, just, we've got so many standing committees, as we have the, standing committee meetings for the commissioners involved in those standing committees to have an opportunity to discuss events that occurred at a particular meeting if they wish.
Well, I'll say one thing about the policy committee. We appreciate having Bud as our new member, so we want to welcome him and thank him for his ongoing contributions, and then also mention that the policy committee has discussed a need for, we've had a couple policy ideas, but one I'll mention now, which is, which would be coming back to the board, obviously, a policy related to how we prioritize CIP projects, and I think that will be a good thing to discuss in relation to the budget. And that's pretty much my update from the policy committee. So,
I move to adjourn.
all right, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.